Chapter 1139. After saving Tu Xiaobai, Wu Qi's group had no other way out, so they continued to move forward. They walked forward step by step, and no one looked back. How many years had passed? Wu Qi didn't care about this question. Outside the seven holy palace, time, space, and all the other rules that ordinary people were used to didn't exist or were distorted. They walked on the plank road step by step, breaking the deadly restrictions everywhere. They struggled on the edge of life and death, and they didn't have time to care about the things around them. Many times, Wu Qi was almost killed by the restrictions, and so were Princess Zhongli's group. They were either in some dangerous places, or there was an extremely powerful beast, or there was a terrifying poison that could kill people within 3 to 5 breaths. All kinds of restrictions emerged one after another. Wu Qi struggled and tried his best to study the symbols left by the restrictions. He broke them one by one to protect them. A long time ago, when Wu Qi's group had walked through hundreds of plank roads of different colors, they arrived in front of a grand palace. This palace was one of the 9 palaces outside the 7 holy palace. According to the strange beast in the map, if they could enter this palace and come out safely, Wu Qi's group would receive great benefits. Princess Zhongli's group would have a chance to reach the incipient creation realm. However, after they got out of this palace, Wu Qi's group wouldn't have a chance to enter the 9 palaces outside the palace anymore. They would directly enter the 7 holy palace to find their own treasures. They would either get great benefits from the 7 holy palace and leave safely, or they would be buried in the 7 holy palace. But no matter what the result was, they would never be able to enter the 9 palaces again. Thus, Wu Qi resolutely gave up on entering this palace. He chose another plank road and continued to move forward. There were pavilions, courtyards, halls, and pagodas everywhere. At the end of the plank road, there would always be a delicate and magical building with 2 or 3 treasures left by the great experts in the holy world. However, none of them were sacred treasures. They were all drawings, books, and the like. Most of them were the symbols in Wu Qi's sea of consciousness, which were made up of thousands or even tens of thousands of layers of light patterns, which recorded a huge amount of data. How many symbols had they collected on the way? Wu Qi didn't bother to count. At first, he was still interested in counting how many symbols he had and how many benefits he had received. But when he counted to over 12,000 runes, there was one time when they were in a desperate situation, and all of them were nearly killed by a lava earthworm that leaped out from the lava. At that point, he no longer paid attention to these worldly possessions. He concentrated all of his energy and spirit to break all the restrictive spells along the way, trying his best to save the lives of all the people around him. In the end, did he collect 100,000 or 1,000,000 symbols that recorded countless information? He didn't know, and he couldn't be bothered to count. In any case, he only knew that more than half of the symbols had been integrated into his divine soul, because he had completely absorbed all the knowledge contained in those symbols. Step by step, his cultivation base of saint energy did not improve substantially, and the restrictive spells on the walkway were not something that could be broken with a strong cultivation base. His knowledge and experience became more and more plentiful. He had seen the most common rare beasts and poisonous herbs in the saint's world, as well as the various natural hazards, restrictions, and other strange things. His mind became more and more stable, his mind became more and more intelligent, and his soul became more and more condensed and powerful. His strength remained just like before, but his mind had completely exceeded the limits of his current strength. Princess Zhongli, Qixia, and the others followed Wu Qi without a word of complaint. Along the way, they had narrowly escaped death, and many times they were almost wiped out, suffering countless hardships. But, every time Wu Qi cracked a restrictive spell on one of the walkways, their strength would improve significantly. Although in the cognition of the strange beast and the spirit gatherer in the 9-palace diagram, Princess Zhongli and the others were still mortals, like ants in the sacred realm, their overall strength had reached the limit of mortals and could no longer be improved. Whether it was their physical body, spirit, magical power, divine ability, or even their knowledge and experience, they had reached the limit of the mortal. Wu Qi imparted the knowledge he obtained to them without reservation. Although because of their interest and ability to understand, Princess Zhanglu and the others only learned a part of the vast knowledge that Wu Qi imparted to them, they gained endless benefits from it. Quantitative change led to qualitative change. As long as they were given the slightest chance, they could be reborn and evolve from the immortal realm to the primordial creation realm. Finally, one day, Wu Qi and the others stepped out of the last dark purple plank road. There were no more plank roads in front of them, only countless stars hovering quietly in front of them. Wu Qi opened the map of 9 palaces. The countless tiny silver lights that crisscrossed around the 9 silver balls on the map had completely disappeared. They had gone through all the plank paths, and there was not a single one left. The beast's head emerged from the map. He stared at Wu Qi as if he had seen a ghost. Do you know? You've walked through all the plank roads in the outer 9 palaces. You've done it. You've really done it. Wu Qi, who had no anger on his face, smiled and nodded. We've done it, yes. The beast twitched his mouth, shook his head, and sighed. How can there be freaks like you? How can you hold on until now? Many times, you've almost been wiped out. Are you really not afraid of death? You bunch of freaks, what should I say to you? Wu Qi turned around and held Princess Zhanglu and Yi Xia in his arms, whose faces had also become incomparably calm and resolute. Ao Buzan threw his head back and laughed triumphantly. What's so strange about that? Lao Tzu trusts this kid, so whatever he does, Lao Tzu will follow. Look, Lao Tzu didn't suffer a loss either. Hee, let's see how many girls Lao Tzu can charm with his scales. Proudly, he exerted his power and covered Ao Buzan's body with a thick layer of purple golden dragon scales. The dazzling dragon scales were nearly transparent, glinting brilliantly like diamonds. They made Ao Buzan look like a god, and the sacred, solemn, and lofty feeling he gave off could really charm many female cultivators with a weak mind. Lord Xiansheng was also laughing. With a sway of his body, a thick layer of silver-purple dragon scales immediately covered his body. They were the same brilliant dragon scales, but they were slightly less overbearing and barbaric than Ao Buzan's. The defensive strength of these dragon scales was amazing. In any case, even Lord Xiansheng himself could not break their defense with the illusion-breaking halberd, which had been upgraded dozens of times. Smiling, Lord Xiansheng said to Wu Qi, "We've agreed to advance and retreat together." The catfish flood dragon opened her big mouth and laughed, then said in a simple and honest manner, "Following brother Wu Qi, you'll have meat to eat." Gold horn, gold feather, and silver feather did not say anything. They just looked at Wu Qi. Even if they had something to say, it was probably the same as catfish. Following Wu Qi would give them meat to eat, especially gold horn and silver horn. They had long believed that it was Wu Qi who had saved them from a horrible life of eating grass all day long. Only by following Wu Qi would they have meat to eat. Yuan Qing and Tu Xiaobai looked at Wu Qi with a silly smile. They clearly remembered that they were just some little fiends and devils on Pangu continent, facing the pursuit of the official army of Deyu and the threat of those powerful cultivators all day long. It was Wu Qi who took them as his disciples. It was Wu Qi who gave them their first flying swords and magical treasures. It was Wu Qi who gave them their first bottle of spirit pills. It was Wu Qi who provided them with security and dignity, which was more important than the safety of their lives. So, wherever Wu Qi went, they followed. It was that simple. Even though they almost died along the way, even though they struggled with life and death along the way, they had always followed him. As for Ninetails, who was lying next to them, drooling and gnawing on the thigh of an unknown beast, he did not think so much. When he broke out of his shell, he saw Wu Qi at first glance, and Wu Qi always gave him a lot of delicious food, so he followed Wu Qi wholeheartedly. It was as simple as that. Wu Qi glanced at the crowd with a smile, and suddenly felt that he was a failure as a human being. Except for Princess Zhanglu and Yi Xia who were his wives, Ao Buzan and Lord Xiansheng who were his brothers, and Tu Xiaobai and Yuan Qing who were his disciples, why were all these people a bunch of foodies? They all seemed to be following him with the thought that they would have meat to eat. What was this? He shook his head and gave a wry smile. His knowledge and experience were no longer the same as before. He picked up the map of the 9 palaces and sighed softly, what a wonderful restrictive spell. The outer 9 palaces have always been in this map, right? Well, can't anyone get this map except me? The strange beast laughed. He shook his head and said, there are thousands of such maps. Anyone who enters the 7th sacred palace will get one. But, the first one to walk all the paths in the outer 9 palaces and obtain the complete inheritance of the founder will be able to open the outer 9 palaces. Casually throwing the map away, Wuqi asked with a smile, has anyone else come in these days? The map of the 9 palaces flew higher and higher as beams of silver light kept shooting out of it. The strange beast's laughter kept coming from all directions. You've spent many years here, but in the chaos space, it's just 1 day and 1 night. In this 1 day and 1 night, the 7 sacred palaces have attracted more than 30,000 living beings from all over the chaos space through the 7,200 entrances. The strange beast sighed, then shook his head and said, you are the only ones who have walked all the paths. Apart from you, there are only 43 people who are still alive now. All of them have chosen to enter the 7 sacred palaces. As for the outer 9 palaces, they do not have the confidence to walk all the way. 9 dazzling balls of silver light rushed out of the map, and from them, 9 palaces of different shapes, but all magnificent and simple, gradually emerged. These palaces were not very large, occupying only about 10,000 acres of land. They were arranged in 9 positions, hovering silently in front of the crowd. The map of the 9 palaces transformed into a large sheet of silver light and blended into the bodies of Wuqi and the others. The strange beast's voice rang out quietly, go in and try your luck. Wuqi pondered for a brief moment, then took the lead and flew towards the nearest palace. The restrictive spell of flying had disappeared, so they could fly freely. While flying slowly, Wuqi frowned and asked, how did those people get the map? Could it be that they also have a founder like me? The strange beast laughed strangely and said, well, they don't have a founder. But, who said that I have to feed myself with the wine and meat I created to get the map? Different people have different tests. Don't you know that? Wuqi was speechless, shaking his head as he flew towards the palace. Chapter 1140. After exclaiming for a while, Wuqi took the lead and walked into the palace. While talking, the old man suddenly burst into tears. I have thousands of new concubines in my palace. How could I die like this? Wuqi and his company raised their heads to look at these statues as well. They were all wearing the same tall crowns and the same long robes, and all had a serious expression on their faces. There was even an indescribable aura of death in their granite-like expressions. Wuqi always felt that these old men and women looked like prisoners on death row. It was as if they knew that they were going to die, and everyone was just pretending to be calm. After commenting on these statues for a while, Aobuzan squatted on the ground, slammed the ground hard, and then shook his head and sighed. Different from these statues, which took a lot of energy to maintain, the materials used in this palace and the square outside the palace were simply too shabby. There were no precious materials used, but ordinary granite that could be seen everywhere. However, the polishing process was very delicate. The lines of the rock were pieced together into exquisite patterns, which looked dignified. A figure suddenly appeared in front of Wuqi and the others. It was a white-bearded old man wearing a white robe and a high crown. The kind-looking old man quietly looked at Wuqi and the others for a while. Suddenly, he sighed and said, "You are here. Since you are here, I am already dead, right? Ah, I am actually dead. There are so many good wines to enjoy, so many beauties waiting for me to love. How could I die?" However, outside the other palaces, the statues standing on the giant pillars were strange. Some were beasts, some were birds, some were insects, and some were poisonous snakes and pythons. However, these statues were much fewer than the humanoid ones. For example, there were at most 100 statues of poisonous snakes and pythons. The voice of Jailing sounded faintly, "The holy world is divided into 10 ranks. There are 3 ranks of initial creation, 3 ranks of spiritual ancestor, and 3 ranks of sage. The last rank is the rank of the strongest 7. Congratulations, Master. You are now a qualified original creator. You are now the weakest original creator. Hundreds of statues were all broken, and the holy power in the statues had been absorbed by Wu Qi. Only then did Wu Qi feel that his body had finally undergone a substantial change. Whether it was his fleshly strength, the cultivation base of his holy energy, the range of his divine sense, or the sharpness of his 5 senses, everything was very different from before. Along the way, people were quietly guessing all kinds of possibilities in the holy world. They had already reached the front door of this palace. Under the gaze of those statues, they walked slowly along a corridor in the center of the palace. Sometimes, they would look up and look at the statues on top of the huge pillars. There was no need to ask to know that these people were definitely experts who had once commanded great power in the saints' world. Regular spirit ancestors and founders would not be able to leave their mark here. They would be saints with a name at the very least. Looking up at those statues on top of the pillars, Wu Qi, Wu, and sages. Wu. What were they thinking when they died? Did they have a sense of crisis like Wu Qi? Did they struggle for survival like Wu Qi? Did they pursue power like Wu Qi? Are they the real original creators now? Wu Qi shook his head. It seemed that although the hierarchy in the holy world was simple, the difference between each rank was huge. Stretching his body, Wu Qi let go of Princess Zhanglu and Yixia's hands. He pressed his hands on the stone door, which was 30 meters tall and 6 meters wide, and slowly pushed it open. Before Wu Qi could think of a topic to strike up a conversation with this old man, the old man suddenly smiled and said, "Sai, if I die, then so be it. If I die, none of them will be able to escape. Hee, so many people will die with me. There are my old lovers and my old enemies. If they all die, I won't be lonely." Holding Princess Zhanglu and Yixia's hands, Wu Qi smiled as he walked. "We won't become statues in the future, right? I remember a long, long time ago, I said that I will live well, and live well with the people around me." As he pushed, Wu Qi found that the stone door was so heavy that it could make a person collapse. With his current strength, he almost couldn't push it open. It was too heavy, indescribably heavy. Blue veins popped out from Wu Qi's forehead, and his entire body was soaked in sweat. He could even taste the blood in his throat. He had used all of his strength, and only then did he barely push the stone door open, just enough for a person to pass through. Cracking noises kept coming out from the door, as one statue after another turned into dazzling streams of light that looked like diamond dust, drifting down from the sky. These statues were all protected by defensive mechanisms, but under the influence of the thievery energy, these defensive mechanisms were broken by Wu Qi, and all the power contained in these statues transformed into pure holy energy, flying towards Wu Qi. Panting and sweating profusely, Wu Qi pulled back his hand. With a bitter smile on his face, he looked at the palace door, which was only slightly opened, and said, "Well, let's just go in. This door is just too heavy. Is this some ordinary granite?" But soon, they raised their eyes and looked at the few palaces in the distance. This time, Eo Buzan smiled as well. Right outside the palace closest to them, on those huge pillars stood statues of handsome men and beautiful women. There were handsome young men who looked like deities, and girls who were stunningly beautiful. These statues of handsome men and beautiful women were very much to Eo Buzan's taste. He clenched his fists. He wanted to protect his 2 wives and the children in their wombs. In Princess Zhongli's belly was the fruit of him and her, a lovely life destined to be strong, and in Yixia's belly was the terrible 360,000 invisible sky devils that he and she had inadvertently given birth to. But no matter they were devil seeds or devils, they were Wu Qi's children. He wanted to protect them. It was empty outside the palace, and there was no plaque or anything like that to indicate the name of the palace. However, there were hundreds of giant stone pillars surrounding this quaint palace, and on top of each pillar stood a tall statue. They were all old men and women wearing tall hats and long robes, their faces solemn and respectful. All of them had their heads slightly lowered, as if they were sizing up Wu Qi and his company. Suddenly, a faint sigh was heard coming from within the palace, giving Wu Qi a fright. Luxurious. This is too luxurious. Ao Buzan was shocked. Aren't they just statues? Do they really need to put in so much effort? His brothers, his friends, and his family were all people he cared about. He needed more power. He needed more power. He wanted to protect them. It did not matter if they were world breakcasters or something else. If they wanted to harm Wu Qi's interests, they would fight to the death. A speck of spiritual light flashed between his brows, and the first strand of innate thievery energy turned into an invisible net that silently enveloped the hundreds of statues. Wu Qi controlled the thief air to invade the statues. He quietly shouted, "If you guys are dead, why are you leaving these shadows? If you are dead, you are dead. If you leave a statue, no one will remember you. Only being alive is real. If you are dead, you should die cleanly." Wu Qi suddenly realized he had forgotten the name of Qingqing Taoist. He still remembered the despair and helplessness he felt. It was that kind of despair and helplessness that drove him to where he was today. It drove him to struggle hard, to obtain higher authority and greater power at all costs. Not only did he have to protect himself, but he also had to protect the people around him. The sky was filled with streams of light that looked like snowflakes. The streams of light kept falling down, shattering the statues one after another. Ao Buzan looked at the statues that kept breaking. He sighed and said, "Tsk. Are the saints in the holy world all old men and women? Why is there not a single one of them young and beautiful? Tsk, if these statues are destroyed, then so be it. It's not a pity." Hearing Ao Buzan's words, everyone came back to their senses. Wasn't that right? Why were these statues all old men and women? Wu Qi felt cold sweat all over his body. He subconsciously glanced at Ao Buzan. Why did this old guy say the same thing as Ao Buzan? Wu Qi was stunned. Saint artifact and last words. How should he choose? Everyone looked at each other in surprise. Even Ao Buzan, who was the most unscrupulous, shut his mouth. The divine abilities of the holy world were truly unfathomable. They used their divine senses to scan the stone door again and again. It was indeed an ordinary stone door carved out of granite, and there were no restrictions placed on it. However, how could such a thin granite door be so heavy? While speaking, Wu Qi suddenly swore, because he suddenly saw that the stone door that had exhausted him so much was only as thin as a cicada's wing. It was even a few times thinner than a cicada's wing. Such a thin door, in Wu Qi's impression, he could blow it into pieces with one breath, but it actually made him so tired. But the power contained in these statues shocked Wu Qi and the others. It was a terrible power that was several times stronger than the current Wu Qi. This unimaginably powerful energy was evenly distributed within the statue. Clearly, this energy was only used to maintain the statue from being damaged. After laughing a few times, the old man pointed at Wu Qi and asked, "Little Shi Chuang, do you want the powerful saint artifact left in this palace, or do you want to hear my last words?" Opening up his body and sea of consciousness, Wu Qi absorbed the pure and powerful saint energy. There was a faint layer of lustrous light flashing on the surface of his body, and his breath became more elusive. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, he slapped himself on the forehead and said in a self-deprecating manner, "I've forgotten again, in this place, what is ordinary and what is not ordinary. There is no standard to judge them. Maybe, the granite in the holy world is like this. A palm-sized piece of granite is as heavy as hundreds of stars. Damn it." Obviously, the appearances of saints in the holy world were not the same. Unlike all cultivators in Pan-Gu world, who were trying their best to cultivate themselves into human shapes, saints in the holy world mostly kept the original looks of their own kind. But apparently, the majority of saints in the holy world looked like human beings. At least 60% of saints looked exactly like Wu Qi and the others. For some unknown reason, as he walked in the deathly silent palace, he suddenly thought of something that happened a long time ago. Back on Earth, in the remains of the ancient city in Machu Picchu, he and his friends, he and his brothers were easily crushed, as if they were ants. What was the name of that priest, who had been riding on a flying sword? The holy world was once glorious, the holy world, the world that all living beings in Pan-Gu world and chaotic world could dream about. Those supreme beings, who stood high above the masses and controlled the fates of billions of living beings, had left nothing but these statues. Ji Hao glanced at Ao Buzan and the others, who were walking beside him. The others were struck dumb. They had been fighting side by side with Wu Qi for the past few days, and they had weathered countless storms and obstacles along the way. They all knew that Wu Qi's current strength had long gone beyond the limit of their imagination. However, as powerful as Wu Qi was, it took him so much effort to open the door. What was this door made of? Chapter 1141. The area of this palace was not very large, and the interior hall was only a little over 100 acres in size. It was very clean, without a single pillar, and the ceiling was over 1,000 feet above the ground, looking very spacious and bright. The old man floated in front of Wu Qi and the others. Behind him was a hazy halo, and one could vaguely see many strange-shaped objects flickering in the halo. Hey, hurry up and tell me, do you want a powerful sacred tool, or do you want to hear my last words? The old man squinted his eyes and laughed a few times. He clapped his hands and said with a relieved smile, since I'm already dead, then let me die a clean death. As for those new concubines, if it's a pity, then so be it. In short, do you want a sacred tool or my last words? Hurry up and think about it, I don't want to waste my time with you kids. Without waiting for Wu Qi to speak, the old man urged again, although my time was not precious when I was alive, now I'm in a hurry to die, and I'm in a hurry to die a clean death. So you'd better hurry up and decide what you want. Wu Qi did not say anything, he also squinted his eyes and looked at the old man. He carefully probed the old man with his divine sense and found that the old man's body was no different from an ordinary person's. He had flesh and blood, a temperature, and a heartbeat. He looked like a normal person, but his aura was a little strange, and he seemed to be missing something. He should be a man-made object, an object created by a sage. He was not a ghost, nor was he a puppet, nor was he a projection, nor was he a doppelganger. What was this old man? Wu Qi had not yet come into contact with the level of those sages, so he could not figure out what this old man was. He did not give Wu Qi any sense of threat, just like a bowl of water. Seeing that Wu Qi did not say anything for a long time, the old man scratched his head and slightly tilted the crown on his head. He smiled and said, "Is it hard to make a decision?" "Well, I can't tell you my last words first, but I have some powerful sacred tools here, I can take them out for you to see." The old man casually made a grabbing motion towards the light curtain behind him, and a quivering pink ball of liquid was pulled out by him. The ball of liquid immediately condensed into a pink crystal ball the size of a human head. He proudly weighed the crystal ball in his hand and said with a chuckle, "This is the one and only treasure in the world, Womanland." Hee, it was the sacred artifact that I was most proud of back then. Ao Buzan's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. He grinned and rubbed his palms together. Womanland? TSK, what's the use? The old man glanced at him with a smile and nodded thoughtfully. He muttered in a low voice, "So there's someone with the same interests here. It's a pity that I'm already dead. Otherwise, I'd definitely compare notes with you on how to deal with beauties. Back in the day, I was able to sleep with 30,000 beautiful virgins without falling, and I killed them until their blood flowed like a river. TSK, I established myself as the #1 man in the sacred realm who cherishes beauties." While blowing his own trumpet, the old man did not care about the strange expression on Ao Buzan's face. He gently pointed at the Womanland, and a moan rang out. The huge crystal ball sprayed out a pink mist, which gradually spread out with a faint fragrance. Then, a soft voice and laughter could be heard. When the mist dispersed, a dozen naked young girls appeared next to the old man, smiling sweetly. Each of these girls had a beautiful face. They had plump and supple breasts, slender and soft waists, and long and powerful legs. They were either pure, enchanting, noble, gentle, smiling, angry, chasing each other, or sitting quietly next to the old man, looking at the crowd with a smile. What frightened Wu Qi was that the weakest of these girls had the cultivation base of the peak level of Tao reasoning, and the strongest one had the cultivation base of the peak level of Tao breaking. Moreover, there was a pair of beautiful twin girls. One of them was emanating a strong heat, while the other was emanating a chilly air. Clearly, they were a pair of beautiful girls who possessed the power of both ice and fire. Ao Buzan's saliva dripped from the corner of his mouth to the ground. He stared at the twin girls and said with a silly smile, unspeakable beauty. Twin sisters, ice and fire. How could there be such a pair of beautiful girls in the world? Oh my, this womanland is indeed a supreme divine artifact. The old man smiled and handed the pink crystal ball to Ao Buzan. If you want it, it's yours. Ao Buzan wiped the corner of his mouth, shook his head, and gave a long sigh, then took a resolute step back. Staring at the womanland, he sighed and said, it's indeed a supreme divine artifact. Unfortunately, although Lao Tzu Ao Buzan likes women, he knows what's good and bad. I can't take this treasure. Alas, what a pity, what a pity, what a wonderful treasure. The old man looked at Ao Buzan in surprise and shouted, this divine artifact can create all kinds of beautiful girls according to your will. Countless beautiful girls will be at your beck and call, and each of them has extraordinary strength. Whether it's for plucking or dual cultivation, they are all supreme treasures. Are you sure you don't want such a supreme treasure? Ao Buzan crudely scratched his groin, which had begun to swell up. He gave a cold grin and said, when it comes to women, Lao Tzu prefers the violent ones. Lao Tzu has no interest in these kind of girls who offer themselves to him obediently. Giving the old man a strange look, Ao Buzan suddenly burst into laughter and said, too bad you're a male, old fool. If you were a female, hee. The old man's face turned green. He had never seen a bastard like Ao Buzan before. He gave Ao Buzan a furious glare, then turned to look at Catfish Flood Dragon. A bright gleam flickered in his eyes, as he casually threw the womanland back into the light screen behind him, then pulled out a gleaming butcher's knife from the light screen. Staring at Catfish Flood Dragon, he smiled and said, this is a good treasure, and it's also a good treasure. The name of this knife is Forest of Flesh, and it's a rare and extraordinary treasure. Holding the butcher's knife, he gently swung it in the air, and a miserable howl echoed out. A 5-clawed golden dragon fell down from the sky, sprawled on his back. There was a clear cut on his stomach, and his internal organs were being pulled out by a strange force. Amidst a shrill dragon roar, the scales and internal organs of the golden dragon fell off one after another, while his muscles, flesh, and bones were separated by a strange force. A sheet of flame enveloped the golden dragon's body, and before long, a strong aroma of meat wafted out. Catfish Flood Dragon, Gold Horn, and the others immediately began to drool, especially Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Gold Feather, and Silver Feather, who could not control their infatuation with the roasted dragon meat. Abruptly, they took 2 steps forward. Smiling, the old man handed the butcher's knife to Gold Horn and said, this is the Forest of Flesh, and you've seen its power. With a casual slash, no matter what you want to eat, or who you want to eat, this knife will fulfill your wish. Wu Qi cleared his throat. Gold Horn and the other 3 took a deep breath and slowly took a few steps back. Shaking his head, Gold Horn said vaguely, can you let us eat you? The old man's face turned a little unsightly. He tilted his eyes and casually threw the Forest of Flesh into the light screen behind him. After that, he sighed lazily, shook his head, and said, what a group of little kids who are not easy to deal with. Have a look at how many good treasures I have here. Then, he pointed his finger behind him, and the light screen quietly shattered, revealing thousands of holy items glinting with strange lights. He looked at Wu Qi, smiled, and said, these are all good treasures, countless of them. Some are powerful enough to destroy a saint, some can create a saint in an instant, and some can help you cultivate faster. There are also many other miraculous holy items like the Women's Kingdom and the Forest of Flesh. Everything is here. Taking a deep breath, the old man squinted and smiled. What do you want? Wu Qi pointed at the old man and said in a deep voice, I want to hear your last words. The old man looked at Wu Qi with surprise. Anyone with a normal brain would choose these holy items, right? My last words. Do you think my last words will leave some clues about hidden treasures that can help you get more holy items? That is impossible. Wu Qi frowned and shouted coldly, for the people of the holy world, even if I am just a small creator, what are holy items? These worldly possessions could be created at will. Holy items are just tools that saints create to make it convenient for them to live in. But your last words, I really want to hear them, because I don't want to die in the hands of a world breaker like you guys. The old man looked at Wu Qi in surprise. He nodded and said, You are a sensible person. Shaking his head and sighing, the old man said with praise, Before you guys, there were 4 people who came here, but they only chose a holy item and left. Compared to you, they are really too stupid, too stupid. After laughing a few times, the old man asked, Then, since you guys have walked all the plank roads outside to come here, then, you should have heard the pile of nonsense left behind by that little guy, Dan, right? Ha, my fate is up to the heavens, not me. That little guy complained a lot, right? Wu Qi remembered that when he collected the embryo of the world breaker, the strange head in the second floor complained. He nodded and smiled bitterly. He complained for more than 20 hours, it was really unbearable. The old man nodded. He squinted his eyes and thought for a while. He slowly said, In that case, just like that little guy complained, if you don't want to die, you will have to surpass the 7 elites' power. That way, you guys will truly never die. The old man sighed and waved his hand. The thousands of holy items behind him shattered at the same time. Then, he slowly said something. World breaker to the holy world was a natural disaster. At the same time, it was a human disaster. World breaker represented the 13 most negative powers of the holy world. The holy world had many saints and almighty. During their long practice, they expelled the negative powers from their bodies. All of the negative powers gathered together to form the embryo of a world breaker. In other words, world breaker was the combination of all the negative powers that the saints and almighty had expelled. That was why they had such strong power. That was why they could make the entire holy world collapse. But world breaker should not have appeared. They were just floating powers. They should not have been able to form world breaker bodies. But a strong power interfered with all of that. That power made the 13 world breaker forms. It gave them an immortal soul mark. It gave them the power to break the holy world. Where did that power come from? Wu Qi instinctively asked the old man. The old man smiled. He pointed at the palace door and sighed. In that case, you will have to go walk around the other palaces. Chapter 1142. Wu Qi and the others had walked around the 9 palaces surrounding the 7 sacred palaces. In every palace, there was the same choice, a divine artifact or last words. Wu Qi was in for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound. All 9 palaces chose the last words left behind by the saints of the sacred world. After walking around all 9 palaces, they were sent out of the 9 palaces by a huge force, floating in the air above the 9 palaces. The 9 palaces slowly disintegrating into countless tiny halos in front of everyone. Accompanied by the beautiful voice, the halos formed a huge light screen, and a dark and hazy scene appeared in it. A vigorous and powerful voice that seemed to directly blast one's soul resounded in the void. He began by repeating the last words left behind by the saints in the 9 palaces. Then, he began to expand from these last words and began to describe the origin of the sacred world and the origin of everything to Wu Qi and the others. If the last words of the saints in the 9 palaces were the general outline, then what this voice said was the complete story. The light screen was pitch black, everything was dead, and nothing existed. The voice slowly narrated that before the origin of all things, there was a long period of time when nothing was born, and nothing existed. The void where everyone was now was just an endless void. Suddenly, the black light screen began to flicker, and there were faint wisps of spirit light rippling on the surface of the water. The voice said that in the endless void, an unknown force pushed the most primitive sea of life, and above that sea, the most primitive spirit was born. It was similar to the souls of humans today, similar to the divine souls of Wu Qi and the others, but it was more original and purer than all souls and divine souls. This kind of spirit represented the original power of all things. They were ignorant, but they were omnipotent. Suddenly, the sea of life was torn in two, and two huge spirit lights shot into the sky. The voice roared loudly, as if it wanted to blast every word into the divine souls of Wu Qi and the others, firmly imprinting it in their divine souls, so that they would never forget a word it said. In the most primitive spirit, there were two great powers. One represented growth and reproduction, while the other represented death and annihilation. Black and white, light and darkness, life and death, yin and yang, the forces of the world were opposites, and so were the two infinite forces born from the primordial beings. They represented the two sides of the endless void. They were polar opposites and there was no possibility for them to coexist peacefully. In the pitch-black void, a bright light flashed, and the most primitive stardust appeared. The surging stardust swirled rapidly, giving birth to large nebulae, stars, planets, comets, meteorites, and countless celestial bodies. Following that, some of the most primitive lifeforms appeared on some planets with abundant spiritual energy. Following a pattern that Wu Qi was very familiar with, life appeared in the boundless void and began to multiply and evolve. It represented the power of breeding and reproduction, driving the evolution of life. In the beginning, life was weak and insignificant, not even comparable to ants. There were billions of strange and bizarre lifeforms. They constantly multiplied and devoured other lifeforms to evolve, making themselves stronger and stronger. As life appeared and the power of life in the void increased, the power of breeding and reproduction, the power that many saints in the sacred world called Mother, also grew stronger and stronger. The lifespan of those living beings was endless. They never faced the danger of death, and they could reproduce and develop freely. Mother created these living beings, and as they developed and grew stronger, the power of Mother grew stronger and stronger. At the same time, the power that the saints called End, the power that represented death and annihilation, grew weaker and weaker. Because of the power of Mother, End, which had been fighting against Mother ever since it was born, became weaker and weaker. There were many times when it was almost destroyed by a Mother. If Mother really did destroy End, the endless void would continue to develop according to the will of Mother. Life was endless, life was endless, life was endless, and living beings could reproduce and develop freely. They would never face the threat of death. However, after a series of failures, End finally found a way to increase its power. Where there was life, there was death. The continuous reproduction and growth of life made Mother stronger and stronger, while the death and slaughter of life made End stronger and stronger. End began spreading death and war among the living beings. It affected the intelligence of the most primitive group of living beings, forcing them to launch one large-scale war after another. The first group of living beings created by a Mother were incredibly powerful. Some of them even reached the same level as the 7 strongest beings in the sacred world. There wasn't just one or two such powerful beings, but hundreds of millions of them. So many powerful beings erupted in a war that affected the entire race. Countless lives fell, and countless lives perished. Their deaths brought End great power. End, who had been beaten to the brink of death by a Mother, recovered and heavily injured Mother a few times. Life and death, reproduction and destruction. From then on, if there was life, there would be death. The war between Mother and End continued. During the long war, Mother finally realized that in order to destroy End for good, it had to cut off the source of End's power. Therefore, those powerful creatures created by the Mother began to create worlds. For example, the sacred world, and the current Pan-Gu world, these were all manifestations of worlds. The so-called worlds were worlds with their own great Tao, with their own rules, with their own space structure. Worlds and the endless void were separated by a special shield, which could effectively fend off end. After the birth of the realm, the mother created a unique secret art that could expel the negative energies related to the end from the body. Just like the sacred world was peaceful and rarely fought. This was because all the negative energies within the saints' world, spirit ancestors, and primogenitors had been purged. All the negative energies such as envy, hatred, bloodlust, and brutality had been completely purged. All the saints' world, spirit ancestors, and primogenitors could peacefully create their own new races, enjoying their endless lives. But End also found the best way to deal with worlds, which was to gather all the negative powers that had been expelled and turn them into world breakers, giving them immortal soul seals, and letting them destroy worlds one after another. When a world was destroyed, the power of Mother would be severely damaged, while the power of End would be largely improved. Because world breakers came from the powers of living beings in worlds, they could freely enter and leave worlds, start wars, and slaughter living beings. The more they killed, the stronger they became. At last, they could destroy a world completely. Looking at the ever-changing illusions on the screen and listening to the voice's explanation, Wu Qi and the others felt like they were in a dream. Suddenly, a very tall, handsome man appeared on the screen. He stood in the endless galaxy, and his eyes stared blankly at Wu Qi and the others. Suddenly, the voice became extremely agitated, and began to tell a series of unimaginable things to Wu Qi and the others. Mother and End had been fighting for countless years. In the most recent war, both sides were injured, and the two powers went into a long hibernation. The Saints' world was the last surviving world in the endless outer space. Even if there were a few living beings in the outer space outside the Saints' world, they did not amount to much. They did not even develop enough intelligence. At the last moment before the sacred world was destroyed, the last and strongest group of saints worked together to perform divination. Finally, they found an important piece of information. Because Mother and End were in a deep sleep, their control over the endless space was extremely weak. This gave the countless living beings who had been controlled by the two powers the best chance in countless years, the chance to transcend the mortal world and become saints, the chance to transcend everything. Although Mother and End were powerful, and although they were existences similar to all creations, they were just the aggregations of the most primitive spirits in primordial era. They were omnipotent, but they did not have a clear intelligence like Wu Qi and the others. They could not think, calculate, strategize, or deliberately prepare for a certain purpose. At the end of the day, they were just two powerful forces, similar to the great Tao of nature. Therefore, Mother and End could be deceived. They could be deceived. Especially now, when they were all in a state of endless hibernation, some lucky creatures, if they had enough luck and fated chances, would have the chance to transcend the mortal world and become a saint, transcending everything. If they succeeded, they would become existences equal to the Mother and End. From then on, they would no longer be controlled by them. They would be able to do whatever they wanted, and they would no longer have to worry about birth, aging, sickness, and death. The figure of the middle-aged man in the light screen slowly decayed. The voice sighed. The 7 strongest beings of the sacred world were the group of people who were closest to that level. As long as they could take the last step, they would become existences equal to the Mother and End. Perhaps they would not be as powerful as them, but they would become existences at the same level. Among the 7, even if only one of them succeeded, the sacred world would not be destroyed. Countless living beings in the sacred world would continue to live freely. The scene of the sparkling sea of life appeared in the light screen again. The voice rumbled, Mother and End are the aggregations of the spirits of the absolute beginning, but they are not the aggregations of all spirits. The spirits of the absolute beginning are endless, and the Mother and End each have 30% of their power. As for the ones who came later, we have already annihilated them, but you still have a chance. The light screen suddenly exploded. Countless beams of light gathered together and turned into a splendid path, extending from the feet of Wu Qi and the others. In the 7 holy palaces, we left some things. They might be useful to you, but they might not be useful to you. However, without enough strength, you won't be able to get them. Each of those things is extremely precious, and we only left them for the ones who have the highest chance of breaking through. The voice slowly faded away, turning into a faint sigh, slowly circling around the group. Wu Qi didn't say a word and strode into the path. Chapter 1143. At the end of the path, Wu Qi and the others looked back. The path formed by the blinding light was slowly collapsing. The light rose into the sky and formed into 9 enormous silver light balls, then slowly disappeared into the surrounding stars. The paths and pavilions that Wu Qi and the others had spent countless hours walking through reappeared, looking exactly the same as they had seen before. Wu Qi knew that the defensive mechanisms of the 9 outer palaces had been restored, and the map of the 9 palaces was waiting for a new batch of lucky people to enter the 7 Holiness Palace. If someone could walk through all the paths of the 9 palaces like Wu Qi did, abandoning those powerful divine treasures and choosing to listen to the last words of those saints, everything that Wu Qi and the others had seen would be replayed. This was the inheritance of the 9 outer palaces of the 7 Holiness Palace. It would let those who were qualified to know certain information know what they should know, and then let them choose their future path. Perhaps, some of them would have the so-called great fortune and great luck. They would surpass the realm of creation, break through the realm of spirit ancestor, become saints, and eventually reach the level of the 7 supreme experts. At last, they would take that final step and reach the same level as the mother and the end. They would transcend the mortal world and become saints, truly immortal and indestructible. At that point, one's fate would truly be in one's own hands. No one would be able to scheme against one, and one's fate would no longer be disturbed by external forces. Looking at the enormous defensive mechanisms of the 9 outer palaces gradually restoring, Wu Qi sighed and finally walked out of the path. A bright light faded behind them. They had arrived at the 7 Holiness Palace. The path leading to this place was completely closed. In front of them was the 7 Holiness Palace, the ancient Holiness Palace that Wu Qi had seen before. However, when he saw this palace in his previous life, he was smashed by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs as soon as he stepped into the square in front of the palace, and Yuanling was nearly destroyed. If the Huang clan didn't use the myriad spirit cauldron to protect his true spirit, Wu Qi wouldn't have appeared in this life. Wu Qi breathed out a soft sigh. Then with a deep voice, he told the people around him what happened in his previous life. They carefully looked around. This was the 7 Holiness Palace, the core of the 9 outer palaces. They had narrowly escaped death countless times in the 9 outer palaces, let alone the 7 Holiness Palace. The square they were in was vast, but no one could tell exactly how vast it was. Even with Wu Qi's incredible eyesight, he couldn't tell where the edge of the square was. The tiles on the ground of the square were all carved from huge rocks. Each tile was 300 meters long and 300 meters wide. Countless three-dimensional patterns were carved on the huge tiles, including dragons, tigers, phoenixes, vermilion birds, chilins, cheongqi, and all kinds of strange creatures. At first glance, Wu Qi couldn't tell how many of these tiles there were, and each of them was carved with rare birds, beasts, flowers, and grasses that Wu Qi and the others might or might not recognize. This was simply an open-air exhibition of all kinds of creatures in the holy realm. The Holy Spirit energy, which was glowing faintly with a diamond-like light, was coiling around everyone. The thin Holy Spirit energy was about a foot tall, and when a gentle breeze blew across, the Holy Spirit energy would swirl up tens of feet into the air, silently drifting forward like a watery mist. It looked extremely graceful and elegant. 100 miles ahead of them was the front gate of the 7 Holiness Palace. An enormous archway stood in front of the gate, bringing a great pressure to the crowd. The archway stood tall, and its top seemed to reach into the boundless chaos. No one could see where the top of the archway was. Hundreds of golden statues clad in heavy armors stood on the archway. All of them had their heads lowered, looking down like gods looking down from the clouds. Below the archway was a tunnel that was several miles wide. Different from the tiles on the square around it, the tunnel was paved with translucent, unknown purple crystals. These crystals contained an astonishing amount of Holy Spirit energy. Tiny runes could be vaguely seen at the core of the crystal, giving off frightening waves of energy. The crowd was right in the middle of the tunnel. To the left, to the right, and behind them were boundless squares, with no end in sight. The tunnel led straight into the Seven Holiness Palace. They could see countless layers of eaves in the palace complex, but they also could not see the end of the Seven Holiness Palace. A thin, faint purple mist enveloped the entire Seven Holiness Palace. It was completely silent, giving off an extremely mysterious and even slightly frightening feeling. Didn't they say that some people had come in before us? Ao Buzan looked around curiously, then suddenly burst into laughter. Sigh, they came in a day earlier than us at most. Did they all go in? As soon as Ao Buzan's voice trailed off, a shrill howl came from the main gate of the Seven Holiness Palace behind the archway in the distance. Judging from the howl, it should be a woman's voice. Accompanying the howl was a creepy laughter that made people shudder. The crowd was stunned for a moment, then flew toward the palace gate at the same time. With Wu Qi, a qualified founder, around them, everyone was bold enough to cover the sky. They did not think that there was any creature here that could threaten them. Not to mention Wu Qi, even their own strength had grown to a shocking level after so many dangers. What did they have to be afraid of? There were a few low pavilions near the gate of the Seven Holiness Palace. According to common sense, they should be the place where the guards of the palace lived. At this moment, a beautiful woman was struggling to climb out of a small building, but there seemed to be a great force pulling her from behind. Her slender and fair hands were tightly gripping the threshold of the small building as she screamed at the top of her lungs. A heavy, ox-horn axe fiercely chopped on the woman's right shoulder, almost severing her entire shoulder. A coarse and gloomy voice came from the small building. "Little lady, why are you running? Hurry up and have a good night with me. Hee, judging from your figure, you are still a virgin. I'm afraid you still don't know the benefits of a man, do you?" The woman had suffered a heavy blow, and her hands no longer had any strength left. She struggled to raise her head, looked at Wu Qi and the others, and screamed, "Help!" Then, she was dragged into the small building. Ao Buzan's eyes went wide in anger. He roared furiously, in broad daylight, "Who dares to rob a woman in front of Lao Tzu? You can't have half of such a dissolute business. Whoever dares to rob this beautiful woman from Lao Tzu will wipe out his entire clan." Wu Qi and the others almost threw up a mouthful of blood. In broad daylight, these words were said in a very imposing and awe-inspiring manner. However, what Ao Buzan said at the end really made them want to vomit blood. Sure enough, it was hard for him to change his nature. He was a downright scum. Seeing that the beautiful woman was in trouble, Ao Buzan's speed suddenly increased by a few times. He flew to the front of the small building, kicked the half-closed door, and rushed in while laughing wildly. Wu Qi and the others were not much slower than him. As soon as Ao Buzan rushed into the building, Wu Qi and the others rushed in as well. The inside of the building was spacious and bright. Obviously, there was a magical space restrictive spell here. From the outside, the building looked ordinary, but the interior of the building was over 10 miles in circumference. In the clean hall, the weak woman was lying on the ground, gasping for breath. Standing next to her was a muscular man with a wolf's head, who stood over 20 feet tall. He was holding a gleaming, ox-horn axe in one hand, and had his foot heavily stamped on the woman's back. Ao Buzan laughed wildly and shouted, "Evil creature, let go of that little girl. She belongs to Lao Tzu. Do you dare to touch even a single hair of hers?" The woman, who was gasping for breath on the ground, had a strange look on her face, and even the expression of the muscular man with the wolf's head was extremely strange. Both of them stared blankly at Ao Buzan. After a long while, the muscular man with the wolf's head snapped, "Where did you come from? Bastard, what did you say?" Wu Qi stood behind Ao Buzan smilingly. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the muscular man and the woman, then suddenly laughed and said, Ao Buzan, be careful, it might be a trap. This woman's virginity has been taken by someone long ago, and she is no longer a virgin. You can't trust this wild wolf's words. Ao Buzan was stunned. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the woman for a while, then suddenly burst into a rage and said, You bastards! How dare you deceive your master, Ao Buzan? This woman has indeed lost her virginity. She is no longer a virgin. How dare a hairy animal like you deceive your ancestor? The muscular man with the wolf's head moved his foot away from the woman's back, frowned and said, I've met a smart man. Bitch, there are so many of us, how many can you deal with? The woman snorted coldly. Her body below her chest suddenly swelled up, and soon, the white dress she was wearing was torn to shreds. Along with a jarring sound of bones cracking, the lower half of her body turned into a black spider, measuring several feet in length. Shaking her head, the woman slowly straightened her upper body. She was a half-human and half-spider creature. The woman didn't answer the muscular man's question. Instead, she smiled at Ao Buzan and said, We've killed 3 overconfident fools with this move. Hee, one of them had his yang energy sucked dry by me. TSK, you look strong and sturdy, and you seem to have some strength. If you have the guts, come and fight me. Let's see if your yang energy is more abundant than that pussy just now. Ao Buzan giggled. He scratched his lower body inelegantly, looked at the beautiful face of the woman, and said, Ha ha ha, this master has roamed the chaotic world for countless years, but this is the first time a woman dares to challenge me. How wonderful! Could it be that all the children you give birth to have more than a dozen legs? TSK, you are indeed a rare breed. Wu Qi laughed, while Princess Zhanglu rolled her eyes and shook her head. Both of them took a few steps back at the same time, feeling ashamed to be associated with Ao Buzan. Seeing that the girl next to him was flirting with Ao Buzan, the wolf-headed man could not help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. Cut the crap, Lao AI. Don't forget our agreement. Listen up, all of you, this is a robbery, he bellowed. Fiercely waving the huge oxhorn axe in his hand, the wolf-headed man bellowed, This is a robbery. Hand over all the holy items you've obtained from the outer 9 palaces. The man will cripple his own cultivation base, and the woman will take off her clothes and wait for me to pamper her. Then, you will have a chance to live. Robbery? Wu Qi smiled, a very bright smile. How many years had it been since he had encountered such an interesting thing? He pointed his finger at Catfish Flood Dragon. Excitedly, Catfish Flood Dragon swung her hammer and ran towards the wolf-headed man while crying out joyfully, Robbery! Robbery! I don't want any holy items, just hand over your flesh and blood. TSK, I can have a good meal now. Gold Horn and Silver Horn had been drooling for a long time. Seeing Catfish Flood Dragon had taken the initiative, they roared at the same time, opened their mouths and sprayed out 2 strong beams of gold and silver light. Chapter 1144. Catfish Flood Dragon's hammer came whistling down, and the wolf-headed man's face fell instantly. Wolves were cunning and vigilant, and as soon as Catfish Flood Dragon struck, he knew that his strength was definitely not as strong as her. A wolf howl towered into the sky, as the wolf-headed man suddenly transformed into a shadow and sneaked into Catfish Flood Dragon's shadow. Then, a bloody mark suddenly appeared on Catfish Flood Dragon's neck. Before the wolf-headed man could exert his strength, the blinding light shot out from Gold Horn and Silver Horn smashed viciously onto Catfish Flood Dragon's shadow. A miserable howl rang out, as the wolf-headed man sprung out of the shadow with flames and cold air gushing out of his body. He roared furiously and casually threw out the bullhorn axe. The surrounding void suddenly froze, and everyone could no longer see anything except for the giant horned axe. A tiny thread of blood sprayed out from Catfish Flood Dragon's forehead, and after that, numerous arrows of blood shot out from her body, as if countless axes were hacking at her. Standing behind her, Gold Horn and the others could not move as well. The bullhorn axe was a holy item that specialized in killing, and when it was wielded by the wolf-headed man, even Ao Buzan, Princess Xianglu, and Yi Xia could not move at all. Only in Wu Qi's eyes, he could clearly see one axe shadow after another flying across the sky, circling and hacking at Catfish Flood Dragon's body. Seeing that an axe was about to hack at Catfish Flood Dragon's neck and was about to behead her, Wu Qi stretched out his right hand just in time and lightly flicked the axe. Under Wu Qi's gaze, he saw that the axe was constructed from 7 lower-grade runes that emanated a towering murderous aura. On top of that, it was obvious that these 7 runes were made with shoddy materials, as the gaps between them were huge. It was obvious that this saint item was a defective item. Suddenly, Wu Qi came to a realization. Perhaps, if those lucky fellows who passed through the outer 9 palaces chose to get a holy item, they would most likely get a defective item like this. His finger glinting with a diamond-like gleam tore through the frozen void, then casually flicked the axe. The finger happened to touch the weakest spot of the 7 runes, and before Wu Qi could exert much strength, dozens of cracks suddenly appeared on the axe. The wolf-headed man howled miserably. He had refined the axe with his own nascent divinity, and now that the axe was broken, it meant that his nascent divinity was also shattered by Wu Qi's finger. The wolf-headed man coughed out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground in a sorry state, gasping for his last breath. The bullhorn axe slowly shattered in front of everyone. Following Wu Qi's incantation, the broken pieces of the axe transformed into a stream of blinking light and fused into Catfish Flood Dragon's body. The dozens of wounds caused by the invisible axe quickly healed, and not even a scar was left on her. Not only that, a very strong holy energy was catalyzed by Wu Qi into original dragon blood essence, which replenished Catfish Flood Dragon's energy. It filled her with energy, and made her in a much better condition than before she was injured. The spider lady, Lao Ai, who was staring at Ao Buzan off to the side, was struck dumb. She and the wolf-headed man were a couple, so she knew very well about his cultivation base and divine abilities, as well as the power of the ox-horn axe he obtained. However, Wu Qi had shattered the axe with just a finger, which seemed impossible to her. It was a holy item left behind by the Holy Realm, a sacred item that was 1 grade higher than a supreme artifact of primal. Who could shatter it with just a finger? Lao Ai stared at Wu Qi, who was wearing a faint smile on his face. Suddenly, her body went limp and she dropped to her knees. She quickly transformed into the shape of a beautiful girl, looked at Wu Qi pitifully and cried out, "Please spare my life, Senior. I was forced by him to do this despicable thing. Please spare my life, Senior." The wolf-headed man stared at Lao Ai in exasperation. Coughing blood, he tried to say something, but before he could say a word, Catfish Flood Dragon had smashed his head into a puddle of blood with her hammer. With a gloomy face, Catfish Flood Dragon grabbed the wolf-headed man, opened her mouth, and swallowed him without giving Gold Horn and Silver Horn a share. While chewing the wolf-headed man's body, Catfish Flood Dragon grumbled with a gloomy face, "How dare you hurt me? Are you happy now that I've been smashed to pieces?" Although Lao Ai was not a kind-hearted person, she was also scared out of her wits by Catfish Flood Dragon's act of swallowing a man alive. It was as if she had seen the miserable scene of herself being eaten alive. She screamed hoarsely with fear, begging Wu Qi to spare her life. Ao Buzan rubbed his palms while laughing strangely, then walked triumphantly to Lao Ai's side. He nodded at Lao Ai and said, "Spare my life, of course I'll spare my life. But, hee, if you want to live, you'll have to serve me well. Hee, tell me quickly, who are you? Why did you set a trap here?" Lao Ai was trembling with fear. Trembling, she dropped to her knees and told Wu Qi everything about herself and the wolf-headed man. They were both creatures born in the chaos, and for some unknown reason, they were born not far from each other, and were even born at the same time. Therefore, they were attracted by the biochemical aura when they were born, and naturally, they hooked up with each other. In the chaos, the strong preyed on the weak, and it was very difficult for newly born chaos-fiend gods like them to survive. Therefore, they cooperated with each other to take advantage of the show today. Every time the wolf-headed man pretended to rape a weak girl, someone would always be fooled to save the damsel in distress, or do something else. In the end, Lao Ai cooperated with the wolf-headed man and successfully killed those unlucky guys. This time, they were setting up a trap again. Just as they lured a formidable chaos fiend god over, an entrance leading to the outer 9 palaces of the 7 Saints' Palace suddenly appeared beside them. The 3 of them fought all the way and entered the entrance by mistake, and were brought to the outer 9 palaces. Both of them had some strength and some luck. They were lucky enough to walk through a few plank paths made up of only hundreds of flagstones, and after learning some information about the outer 9 palaces, they dared not to go any further. In one of the palaces, they obtained a sacred item, the horn axe. Then, they happily left the outer 9 palaces and were teleported to the outside of the 7 Saints' Palace. They had arrived here only a few hours earlier than Wu Qi and the others. After obtaining the horn axe and having their cultivation greatly improved while crossing the plank paths, their confidence was greatly boosted. They resumed their old business outside the 7 Saints' Palace, and unexpectedly, they attracted 3 lucky guys who were also teleported to the outside of the 7 Saints' Palace, and successfully killed them. Having said that, Bai and obediently handed over the 3 shiny sacred artifacts. The 3 sacred items were a needle, a spear, and a huge shield. Because they had just killed 3 people, they did not have the time to refine the 3 sacred items, so they were kept in Lao Ai's hands. Glancing at Lao Ai, Wu Qi did not say anything to her. Xiang Ao did not show any respect and picked up the 3 sacred items himself. With a strange smile on his face, Ao Buzan carried Lao Ai and ran to the 2nd floor of the small building. No one would disturb him there, and he could do whatever he liked to his heart's content. Lao Ai seemed to be very happy to have something with Ao Buzan, and one could easily tell what she was thinking just by looking at her big watery eyes. Lord Xiansheng heaved a long sigh in a low voice and said, "What a great appetite. I can't bring myself to kill a spider demon like her." Wu Qi just smiled. Gold Horn and Silver Horn stole a glance at Gold Feather and Silver Feather, who were standing next to them, and nodded hurriedly. Yuan Qing was the only one who was still clueless about the matters between men and women. He just stood beside Tu Xiaobai and kept giggling like a fool while holding his big stick. It took Ao Buzan more than 6 hours to finish the job. Refreshed, he brought Lao Ai, whose legs were trembling and could hardly walk, down the stairs. Wu Qi had already slightly strengthened the 3 sacred items. As Wu Qi had expected, the 3 sacred items were simply shoddy goods, and any creator who had mastered a little bit of the power of creation would not take a fancy to such rubbish. But, they were still 3 sacred items, and they were good for Ao Buzan and the others to protect themselves. The needle was given to Catfish Flood Dragon, the huge shield to Lord Xiansheng, and the spear was snatched away by Ao Buzan, because he shamelessly claimed that the spear was long, thick, straight, hard, and suited him very well. Who could say anything in the face of the shameless Ao Buzan? Therefore, the spear could only belong to him now. After ordering Lao Ai to follow him obediently, Wu Qi and his company carefully left the small building. Since they knew that someone like Lao Ai was planning an ambush here, it was likely that none of the other lucky fellows who came to the 7 Saints' Palace would be easy to deal with. After all, this was the 7 Saints' Palace, and anyone who had walked the plank path outside the 9 palaces knew that it was a very dangerous place. It was very likely that some people would not dare to enter the palace, and would choose to take advantage of it outside. Wu Qi was not afraid of these people, but those who left the plank path would have 1 or 2 sacred items, and the people around Wu Qi would not be able to withstand their sneak attack. Therefore, it was necessary to be cautious. They continued walking along the plank path into the 7 Saints' Palace. After walking for about 100 miles, when they came to the small square in front of the first palace, over 20 living beings standing in the square stopped Wu Qi and his company. It was obvious that they were led by 3 people, and when they saw Wu Qi and his company, their eyes lit up at the same time. A young man who looked like a human, but had a pair of pointy and long ears, was staring fixedly at Yi Xia, Tu Xiaobai, and Catfish Flood Dragon. It seemed that he was very interested in Yi Xia, Tu Xiaobai, and Catfish Flood Dragon, who looked like little girls. Another young man, who had an unusually burly body and bulging muscles all over his body, and was wrapped in a layer of black bone armor, kept glancing up and down at Princess Xianglu. Deep, muffled sounds of swallowing could be heard coming from his throat. Obviously, he had a very good impression of the noble and graceful Princess Xianglu, who had a cold and solemn expression on her face. Meanwhile, the last young man, a skinny young man with a fair and clean face, had a very strange look in his eyes. He was staring fixedly at Ao Buzan, who had the tallest and strongest body among Wu Qi and his company. His eyes were almost glued to Ao Buzan, especially when his line of sight kept moving back and forth 3 inches below Ao Buzan's lower abdomen. Obviously, he had a very good impression of Ao Buzan, and had a strong urge to have a deep conversation with him. Standing at the entrance of the square, Wu Qi and his company stared coldly at this group of people. None of them said a word. After a long while, the skinny young man, who had a good impression of Ao Buzan, suddenly laughed. He bowed slightly to Wu Qi and his company, then said slowly, "I assume you have the same experience as us. A great fortune is right in front of us. The 3 of us have already made an agreement, and I hope you can abide by it as well. Otherwise, you will be in big trouble." Ao Buzan laughed. He pointed at the young man and said, "You mean, we have to listen to you?" The skinny young man lowered his head shyly and snorted, "If it's you, my friend, I can listen to you as well." Ao Buzan's wrinkled face instantly turned green. He was a lustful man, but he had never been interested in men. Blushing, Wu Qi looked at the young man, smiled and said, "I see, it seems that this is a good match." Ao Buzan's eyes suddenly turned crimson, and all the joints in his body began to creak. Chapter 1145. Destined? Am I destined to be with this rabbit? Ao Buzan was so angry that the skin on his forehead cracked. A pair of purely dark dragon horns slowly drilled out along with a weird noise. The dark dragon power transformed into tens of tiny black dragons, hovering around Ao Buzan. The air suddenly froze, as a bone-piercing coldness and a great heat, which was strong enough to burn human beings into ashes, shrouded the surrounding area. The pale-faced young man glanced at Xiang Ao in surprise, then abruptly laughed with a hissing voice, so strong, I like it." Eyes sparkling with a peach blossom light, the pale-faced young man wielded his sleeve. A heart-shaped, pink-colored crystal slowly flew out of his sleeve and threw it towards Xiang Ao, along with a soft moan. The expressions of the few chaos creatures standing behind the young man changed simultaneously. Subconsciously, they took a few steps back. Obviously, they had all suffered from this pink crystal before. "Be careful," Wu Qi said blandly, then drew back for a long distance. He left Ao Buzan, who was infuriated, and paid no attention to him. Instead, he began looking at the surrounding buildings. According to Pan Gu, every step in the Holy Palace of 7 was dangerous, but they had already entered the first level of the palace. Why hadn't they run into any special magic seals or ambushes? This place looked like an ordinary palace in the human world, but it was especially tall and magnificent. The roof tiles were bronze, the walls were bronze, the pillars were bronze, and the floor tiles were cyan blue, which also had a faint metallic luster. All the palaces in this place looked especially ancient and heavy. Somehow, Wu Qi felt that these palaces were like towering mountains, and the longer he looked at them, the more uncomfortable he would feel. With his eyes sparkling brightly, Wu Qi began focusing on analyzing the surrounding buildings. He didn't even want to pay attention to anything else. The pink crystal slowly flew in front of Ao Buzan, glinting with a faint light and emanating a warm aroma. After drawing an arc in the air that looked like the soft curves between the chest and abdomen of a peerless beauty, it flew toward the top of Ao Buzan's head. At the same time, the surrounding lights and shadows changed. The empty, cyan blue square suddenly turned into a pink boudoir. Silks and satins could be found everywhere, and all kinds of exquisite furnishings could be found everywhere. Countless beautiful boys and girls, as well as countless beautiful human figures, had been pulling and entangling each other in the satins, their bodies wriggling and rubbing against each other. Qixia sneered in a low voice and shook her head disapprovingly. Clearly, the crystal was also a saint artifact, but its style was a little too obscene. Although this obscene and seductive illusion was powerful, it was of no use to Ao Buzan, a heartless monster with a heart of stone. Ao Buzan grinned. He grabbed the soul-splitting spear and thrust it into the sky. The soul-splitting spear let out a long roar and transformed into a raging black dragon that soared into the sky. It spat out dozens of raging fire dragons, which smashed against the pink crystal and forced it to stay where it was. The pale-faced young man's expression changed. Just as he was about to yell out, thick black dragon scales emerged from Ao Buzan's body. He grabbed the holy spear that he had just robbed and thrust it towards the pale-faced young man with a hideous smile. With a thrust of the spear, the surrounding pink illusions shattered with a loud rumble. Countless meteor-like light shadows shot out from the spear, bringing with them a heart-wrenching and lung-splitting shrill as they madly attacked the pale-faced youth's vital points. The pale-faced young man cried out in surprise. His figure flashed, and he transformed into a four-eared white rabbit with light pink fur. His two extremely powerful hind legs kicked hard, and he suddenly turned into a white lightning bolt, darting towards the exit of the square. Just as the lightning bolt was about to rush out of the square, Wuqi casually struck out with his palm. With a loud bang, the four-eared white rabbit was knocked dizzy, and its head slammed into the ground. It was unknown what material the blue-green floor tiles were made of, but they were not damaged in the slightest. However, the four-eared white rabbit's head was bleeding. A large part of its skull was dented, and there seemed to be a few drops of brain juice spilling out. Rabbit! Ao Buzan laughed crazily and swung his spear horizontally. The four-eared white rabbit let out a miserable howl, and its body suddenly twitched violently. A large amount of blood spurted out from between the rabbit's hind legs. Obviously, Ao Buzan had performed some kind of surgery on the rabbit. A rabbit should never learn to be a man. Ao Buzan laughed viciously, strode to Wuqi, grabbed the four-eared white rabbit up, and shook it in his hand. He stared at the few chaotic creatures who were standing behind the four-eared white rabbit and growled, "Who else wants to fight Lao Tzu?" A total of 7 chaotic creatures kneeled down on the ground in great shock. They all showed their true forms, and carefully exposed their bellies. This was a sign that these chaotic creatures surrendered to the strong. They were also shocked by the four-eared white rabbit's violence. Now, the four-eared white rabbit was beaten badly by Ao Buzan. Obviously, Ao Buzan was an even more brutal being. What else could they do but surrender? Wuqi narrowed his eyes and snorted in a low voice. Only Ao Buzan, who was standing beside him, heard what he said. Wuqi wanted Ao Buzan to forcibly subdue the other 2 groups of people. The Saint Palace of 7 was a dangerous place, and having a group of cannon fodder to explore the way was more valuable than any treasure. Although Wuqi still had a qualified cannon fodder, Wuchang, as the 7 Saints' Palace was a mysterious and unpredictable place, and it was very likely that Wuchang would be completely wiped out. Therefore, it was more worthwhile to subdue this group of people and use them as a pathfinder. Ao Buzan understood Wuqi's words. Grinning hideously, he swung his palm and chopped off the four-eared white rabbit's head. A shrill howl echoed out, as a white rabbit's shadow darted out from the four-eared white rabbit's dead body, rushing towards the chaotic space high up in the sky. It looked like it was about to flee. "You can't run, why waste your energy?" Ao Buzan shook his head. Not knowing when, Catfish Flood Dragon had flown up into the sky. She opened her mouth and greedily stared at the white rabbit's divine soul, who had thrown itself into the trap. Then, she swallowed the white rabbit whole. Ao Buzan let out a few strange laughs, winked at the man with pointy ears and the muscular man, then opened his mouth and swallowed the four-eared white rabbit. His sharp teeth chewed the white rabbit's bones to mush. Deliberately, some blood flowed out from the corner of Ao Buzan's mouth, then he nodded satisfyingly and said, "Not bad. Although this fellow's cultivation base is a little weak, his muscles and bones are chewy, just that he has too much hair." Bah! He spat out a mouthful of white hair that flew all over the sky. Then, Ao Buzan reached out his hand and grabbed the pink crystal, which was confronting the soul-splitting spear. With his belly puffed up, Ao Buzan came before the two men, who had an unsightly expression on their faces, and snapped, "Are you the leader? Are these people your subordinates?" The man with pointy ears and the muscular man exchanged a glance. Without saying a word, they launched an attack at Xiang Ao's disrespect. The man with pointy ears pulled out a bow and an arrow. In a blink of an eye, dozens of green dots shot whistling out. The muscular man gave a long and sonorous cry and cast a divine power, expanding his body to nearly 100 feet tall. Then, he swung his huge fist and smashed it down towards Ao Buzan's head. Ao Buzan thrust the spear in his left hand out and unleashed countless beams of light that shot out like shooting stars, shattering the dozens of ghastly green specks. He recognized that the bow and arrow held in the man's hand was also a holy item, so he dared not to let the flames unleashed by the holy item touch him. As for the punch launched by the muscular man, Ao Buzan didn't take it seriously at all. Smilingly, he stuck out his head and let the muscular man's punch land on his head. A shrill howl echoed out as the bone armor on the muscular man's fist shattered. The two dragon horns poking out of Ao Buzan's forehead pierced deeply into the man's fist and crushed his finger bones. The muscular man leaped up and down in pain. Roaring furiously, he pulled out a flail with 3 metal spikes and wielded it with all his strength, smashing it down towards Xiang Ao's head. Ao Buzan's face flickered slightly, and the dragon transformed from the soul-splitting spear quickly went up to meet the flail, clanging and clashing with it. The flail was also a holy item, and the power it unleashed was extraordinarily heavy, as if thousands of stars were smashing down at the same time. The soul-splitting spear trembled violently, and the scales of the giant black dragon were shattered. Even Ao Buzan was trembling violently. With a cold snort, Lord Xiancheng produced the huge shield given to him by Wu Qi. With a boom, it exploded into countless streams of light, weaving into a brilliant curtain of light over Ao Buzan's head, within which countless layers of smoke, clouds, and flames could be vaguely seen. The flail kept smashing on the curtain of light, but it only produced countless blinding flames, and could not shake the curtain even a little bit. No matter what, the huge shield was a good item that had been reforged by Wu Qi, and was much stronger than those fake holy items in the outer 9 palaces. On top of that, the burly man's cultivation base was many levels lower than Lord Xiancheng's, so how could he cause any pressure to the shield? Catfish was even more ruthless. It was as if she never knew how to show mercy. Soundlessly, the holy needle that Wu Qi had reforged turned into a 3-colored beam of light and shot out, piercing into the back of the man's head like an iron needle piercing a piece of tofu. A miserable howl rang out as the 3-colored beam of light shot out from the man's forehead. A stream of brain and blood sprayed hundreds of feet away, spraying right onto Ao Buzan's face. Laughing strangely, Ao Buzan licked off the brain and blood on his face. Then, with a shake of the spear in his left hand, it turned into a stream of light and pierced through the man's heart. Casually, he recited a spell taught by Wu Qi. Abruptly, Ao Buzan's spear turned into a sheet of dazzling, thorny light that penetrated into the man's body. A muffled noise rang out as the man's body was pierced by countless strong light beams that splashed in all directions. His body began to disintegrate, with every cell in his body being minced into tens of thousands of tiny particles, and even his divine soul was pierced into a sieve by the countless light beams. Seeing that 4-eared white rabbit and the man, who were lucky enough to form a small group with similar cultivation base and the power of their holy items, were killed by Ao Buzan and his company, the burly man lost the courage to fight desperately. He threw away the flail in his hand and dropped to his knees in fear and trepidation. "Seniors, please spare my life. I'm willing to submit to you and serve you." The burly man knelt and begged for mercy, while nearly 20 chaotic creatures also dropped to their knees and revealed their true forms in fear and trepidation. Chapter 1146. There were 25 chaotic creatures in total. According to their origins, they were all chaotic fiend gods, just like Yuanling in Wu Qi's previous life. It was just that these chaotic creatures were much less qualified than Lord Yuanling's group. 90% of the 25 of them were newborns who had only been born in the primal chaos in the last 10 periods. Their cultivation bases were not very high. Before they entered the outer 9 palaces, the strongest among them was only a peak-level gold immortal. But, after the baptism of the outer 9 palaces, their cultivation bases had generally improved to the upper tier of Tao reasoning realm, and each of them had obtained a saint item. The cultivation bases of the killed 4-eared white rabbit and the sharp-eared man, as well as the burly man in bone armor who had submitted to Wu Qi, had improved the most, reaching the peak level of Tao reasoning realm. Moreover, the saint items they obtained were the strongest and most mysterious. Therefore, the 3 of them had gathered a few lucky fellows and formed a small gang, trying to get the greatest benefits in the 7 Saints' Palace. There were about a dozen lucky fellows who had entered the 7 Saints' Palace, but they were either ambushed by Lao Ai and the burly man with the wolf head, or killed because they refused to join the 3 small gangs. Therefore, except for Wu Qi and his companions, these 25 people were all the outsiders in the 7 Saints' Palace. In the face of these chaotic creatures who had submitted to the 7 Saints' Palace after being intimidated by violence, Ao Buzan and Lord Xiansheng had beaten them up and extorted all their saint items. In any case, Wu Qi only used these people as tools to explore the way, so there was no need to leave these saint items in their hands. In this way, after being refined by Wu Qi, the people around Wu Qi had at least 1 or 2 saint items to protect themselves. Although the chaotic creatures who had been robbed were resentful, in the chaos, the strong were the kings, and the law of the jungle was the supreme law of the chaos. In the face of Wu Qi and his companions, whose strength was far stronger than theirs, and whose saint items were extraordinary, they could only choose to submit and did not dare to show any signs of disloyalty. When Princess Zhang planted an extremely vicious restrictive spell in their divine souls, the last glimmer of hope in these chaotic creatures' hearts was gone. They were dead set on submitting to her, and no longer dared to have any disloyalty. After Ao Buzan and his companions had taught the 25 unlucky fellows a lesson, Wu Qi had already seen some clues from the surrounding palaces. Unlike when the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs entered the 7 Saints' Palace, all the restrictive spells had been activated. It was not only a matter of selecting a suitable successor, but also a measure of self-protection. After all the world breakers had woken up. If they found the 7 Saints' Palace, they would definitely launch an attack here. If they found the 7 Palace, they would attack. After careful exploration with spirit sense, in Wu Qi's vision, the palaces around had become transparent like flowing water. The palaces twisted and flickered like ripples on the surface of water. Layers upon layers of spatial restrictive spells had been compressed together. Each of the palaces here was embedded with countless others. Some of the palaces might be of real value, while some were probably just tools to fool the eyes and ears of others. In addition, there were many restrictive spells hidden in them that Wu Qi could not identify, but which made his blood run cold instinctively. One wrong step, and he would be smashed to pieces. Wu Qi finally understood what Pan Gu had said about the danger of the 7 Saints' Palace. When Pan Gu entered the 7 Saints' Palace, the restrictive spells of the 7 Saints' Palace had not been fully activated. Pan Gu had almost died and escaped. Now, facing the 7 Saints' Palace with all the restrictive spells completely activated, it would be 100 times more difficult to get any benefit from it. It was not only about power, but also about luck and opportunity. Ignoring the weird looks from the 25 followers, Wu Qi carefully walked forward for 360 steps in a row. Then, he moved to the left, then to the right. With every step he took, he would step on the center of the 3-meter-wide floor tiles. He took 4,900 steps in a row within the area with a radius of 3,000 meters, as if he were dancing. Along with a cracking sound, the edges of the perfectly sealed floor tiles of the square suddenly released a dazzling light. The thin light spread out in all directions, and the crowd could only see this light. Apart from that, they couldn't see anything else. A crystal hourglass appeared in front of Wu Qi. The sand in the hourglass had been flowing down quickly. Under the hourglass was a large bowl, with hundreds of soybean-sized pearls in it. A voice sounded by everyone's ears, telling them how to get through this restrictive spell. Before the sand in the hourglass ran out, they had to pick out a pearl produced by a bluemouth cloud clam from the large net. At most, they could do it 9 times. If they couldn't pick out a pearl that met the requirement before the sand in the hourglass ran out, or if they couldn't pick out a pearl within 9 times, one of them would be killed. The one who would be killed would be chosen by the person who triggered the restrictive spell. In other words, whoever was chosen by Wu Qi, if he failed to pick out the pearl, that person would be killed. Cold sweat oozed out of everyone's back. Princess Xianglu slightly patted her own chest, sighed and said, "Fortunately, we brought these people under our control and didn't kill them all. Otherwise, if my husband couldn't pick out a pearl that met the requirement, one of us would have been killed." The group of people on the scene all nodded in relief, but the faces of the 25 followers had all turned green. They stared at the large bowl floating in front of Wu Qi in fear, hoping that Wu Qi could meet the requirement of the restrictive spell. Wu Qi felt a lingering fear as well. Fortunately, he had come up with the idea of letting his friends die so that he wouldn't die. These 25 unlucky people were brought under his control and used as stones to explore the way. Otherwise, he would have to use them now. There were hundreds of pearls in the bowl, which looked exactly the same, and who could tell which pearl was produced by the bluemouth cloud clam? Throwing a sideways glance at Princess Xianglu and the others, Wu Qi gave a bitter smile and said, "Well, I guess I can only try my luck." Gnashing his teeth, Wu Qi conveniently picked out a pearl from the bowl. Pop! The pearl turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in the air. Obviously, this pearl didn't meet the requirement. Wu Qi was taken aback. He carefully identified the pearls with his divine sense, but all of them were the same. There was no difference at all. He laughed bitterly, then grabbed out another 8 pearls at random. As a result, all 8 pearls shattered and turned into wisps of green smoke. Left with no other choice, Wu Qi pointed at the burly man and said, "Kill him." A stream of watery light descended from the sky. The burly man silently melted into a puddle of clear water and seeped into the ground. He didn't even have the time to let out a miserable howl. A deep and powerful voice rang out, "To be able to activate the restrictive spell in this place, you must be very powerful. Unfortunately, your luck is too bad. The 1 Step to Heaven Pavilion, which is connected to this restrictive spell, is now closed, waiting for other fated people." Wu Qi asked in a deep voice, "What do you mean by 1 Step to Heaven Pavilion?" The voice continued in an indifferent tone, "If you are lucky enough, and you are lucky enough, you will be able to pick out a pearl from the bluemouth cloud clam, and you will be able to enter the 1 Step to Heaven Pavilion. Among them, there are 3 Holy Spirit pills, which were personally concocted by the medicine saint of the sacred realm. Each of these pills can allow an ordinary person to reach the level of a spirit ancestor. If you take all 3 pills at the same time, you will be able to reach the level of a saint." Wu Qi was speechless. The eyes of Ao Buzan and the others all turned green. Princess Xianglu said angrily, "This kind of restrictive spell, it's simply... what the hell?" The hourglass and the big bowl disappeared without a sound. A golden fragrant wind blew over, and Wu Qi and the others were sucked into the second layer of the palace. Obviously, Wu Qi and the others had missed the opportunity to enter the 1 Step to Heaven Pavilion. However, he had found the restrictive spell that led to the 1 Step to Heaven Pavilion, so the restrictive spell of the 7 Saint Palace had been fully activated, sending them into the second layer of the restrictive spell. Wu Qi also shook his head at what had just happened. 1 Step to Heaven Pavilion, 1 Step to Heaven Pavilion, this really tested one's luck and Tao. A Holy Spirit pill that could allow one to immediately reach the level of a saint after taking it? This kind of heaven-defying pill could only be obtained by those who were extremely lucky. Wu Qi felt that it was better for him to cultivate step by step. By the time the golden fragrant wind dissipated, everyone was already in the square in front of another palace. This square was 100 miles long and wide, and was surrounded by high copper walls that blocked everyone's line of sight. Behind them was a towering memorial arch, and on the left and right were 2 purple Qilin statues with 6 wings on their backs. In front of him was a huge palace that was surrounded by white clouds. There were at least 100 floors in the building, and each floor was 30 meters tall. The bronze-colored palace stood on a pedestal made of white jade, and it looked more like a pagoda than a palace. Accompanied by deep and muffled footsteps, 12 metal puppets appeared out of nowhere, each holding a large jade tray in their hands, and came before Wuqi with big strides. The 12 jade plates were filled with all kinds of medicinal herbs, and there were faint dewdrops hanging on the herbs that emitted a strong medicinal smell. Obviously, they had just been picked. A voice rang out again, within a quarter of an hour, eat 108 medicinal herbs. If anyone survives after eating 108 medicinal herbs, he or she will be able to enter the 7 holy palace and read the divine text of evolution. There are 1,200 types of medicinal herbs in the 12 jade plates. 12 of them are non-poisonous, and the rest are highly poisonous. If anyone fails to eat 108 medicinal herbs within a quarter of an hour, 2 of you will be killed, and the one with the highest cultivation base on the scene will be the one to choose. An hourglass quietly emerged in front of Wuqi, and a handful of silver sand quietly flowed down. Clearly, the restrictive spell had started counting down. Wuqi smiled bitterly and helplessly. Frowning, he casually grabbed the weakest of the 24 remaining chaotic creatures and brought him to his side. The man had a haggard face and a scrawny body. As soon as he was grabbed by Wuqi, he screamed out in a hoarse voice, struggling and begging Wuqi to spare his life. Wuqi shook his head, gave a bitter smile, and said, "Spare my life, I can't. I'll try my best to keep you alive." Someone had to eat 108 medicinal herbs. If he didn't let these people who had surrendered to him take the test, how could he let these friends and relatives of Wuqi take the risk? Glancing at the large jade plates held in the hands of the 12 metal puppets, Wuqi quickly identified these medicinal herbs. He felt a surge of joy in his heart. All these medicinal herbs were recorded in the medicinal encyclopedia passed down by the 9 palaces. Indeed, only 12 of them were non-poisonous, while the rest were highly poisonous, which would immediately die upon entering the mouth. However, these 12 non-poisonous herbs were all detoxifying spirit herbs. By combining them in pairs, or in groups of 3, or with the addition of 2 other poisonous herbs, they could detoxify the toxicity of 72 different kinds of poisonous herbs. Among the remaining thousands of poisonous herbs, there were 357 of them that interfered with each other. As long as these poisonous herbs were eaten at the same time, the toxicity would at most make one suffer from abdominal pain, but not fatal. In his previous life, Lord Yuanling was an expert in pill concoction, and he had even obtained the legacy from the 9 palaces in the outer ring. As such, he was very familiar with the changes of these poisonous herbs, and it was not difficult for him to cast the restrictive spell. Laughing out loud, Wuqi grabbed the man, who was struggling crazily in his hand, and shoved all kinds of medicinal herbs into his mouth at lightning speed. Chapter 1147. Shrill cries shook the heaven and earth. The skinny man in Wuqi's hand struggled and howled, but none of this could stop Wuqi's determination to use him as a test subject. 108 herbs were stuffed into the skinny man's mouth at the fastest speed, turning into smelly, sweet, scalding, or icy cold juices that slipped into his stomach. The various herbs reacted with each other, clashing and restraining each other. Eventually, 108 herbs coexisted harmoniously, turning into a ball of warm air that slowly circulated in the skinny man's body. The skinny man felt his entire body brimming with energy, as if even his divine soul had received a certain upgrade. He was overjoyed to find that he did not die, and instead, he had obtained a lot of benefits. He looked at Wuqi in surprise, his eyes brimming with tears, not knowing whether to curse Wuqi or thank him. The deep voice rang out again, "If you successfully consume 108 herbs, you can enter the 7 Saints' Palace and read the divine canon of celestial evolution for 15 minutes. Wuqi arched his brows and snapped, "Just a quarter of an hour?" The voice continued in a lukewarm tone, "If you consume 360 herbs, you can enter the 7 Saints' Palace and read the divine canon of celestial evolution for 6 hours. If you challenge the most difficult restriction and consume 6,400 herbs within 3 days, you can enter the 7 Saints' Palace and read the divine canon of celestial evolution for 3 days and 3 nights." If you fail, you will kill the 3 people designated by the person with the highest cultivation base here. Isn't it just consuming 6,400 herbs? Isn't it just killing 3 people? From the corner of his eyes, Wu Qi gazed at those defectors who were standing off to the side, trembling with fear. Without hesitation, he snapped his fingers and said, "Bring me all the medicinal herbs." 6,400. That doesn't seem too difficult. Rumbling footsteps could be heard as hundreds of metal puppets appeared out of nowhere. With heavy steps, they came to Wu Qi's side, carrying a huge jade tray. Nearly 10,000 fresh herbs were placed on the jade tray, and the strong smell of herbs filled the air. Just the smell of these herbs alone was enough to make people faint. Among these 10,000 herbs, there were less than 1,000 harmless spirit herbs, and the rest were all poisonous herbs. The scrawny man, who had just escaped from death, let out a shrill scream of terror. "Senior, please spare my life. Apart from me, there are so many people here, any one of them could serve you," he cried in a heart-wrenching voice. The 20 defectors cursed in unison, accusing the skinny man of not being loyal enough. They were not willing to shed blood for Wu Qi, and were not willing to contribute to Wu Qi's great cause. A tall, burly, and boastful man even flattered Wu Qi, boasting that he was the supreme almighty expert with the highest achievement in history, and that it was an honor to be caught by Wu Qi to test his medicine. Yet, this skinny man still dared to weep, which clearly showed that he was not loyal to Wu Qi, and at the same time, he did not have enough trust in Wu Qi. Wu Qi should tear him into 1,000 pieces as a punishment. Wu Qi shook his head, then pointed a finger at the skinny man and knocked him out. The defectors were babbling nonsense, but in order to save their lives, they had even thrown away their last bit of dignity. Wu Qi was too lazy to listen to their nonsense. If he really tore the skinny man in his hand into 1,000 pieces, would that burly man offer himself to Wu Qi to test the medicine? Ao Buzan couldn't help but fly into a rage when he heard the flattery from these people. He snapped at them, scaring Chi-Chi into shutting their mouths. There were nearly 10,000 types of poisonous and spiritual herbs, and Wu Qi recognized about 70% of them. According to his understanding of medicinal properties, as long as these herbs were combined organically, it would be enough for the skinny man to consume 6,400 types of herbs without dying. However, the number of herbs was too large, and Wu Qi could not be sure that the skinny man's body could withstand all the medicinal properties without collapsing. He had to find a safe way to make the medicinal properties as gentle as possible. He knew very well that this restrictive spell was aimed at the legacy of creation of the 9 palaces. If it was a lucky guy like Wu Qi who had obtained the complete legacy of creation, he would be able to pass the test with ease, and be qualified to read the sacred canon of celestial evolution. If some people didn't receive the complete inheritance and didn't recognize these medicinal herbs, but they had great luck and didn't die after eating 6,400 kinds of medicinal herbs, or they were simply born with a physique that was immune to all poisons, then according to the 7 holy palaces' predetermined design, these people with great luck and fortune would naturally be qualified to obtain a certain amount of benefits. After all, the 7 holy palace was a place of inheritance, and it was not a place that was deliberately set up so that people could enter but would not be able to leave. This kind of restriction to select a successor was the most reasonable. It took Wu Qi 2 days and 2 nights to carefully mix several thousand kinds of herbs, perfectly matching them with various herbs, and finally, he made the skinny man consume a total of 6,400 different herbs. The skinny man's body swelled up due to the medicinal properties, and he turned from a short man who was less than 4 feet tall into a big man who was 8 feet tall. This was the result of the medicinal properties of the various herbs being neutralized in his body. After all, these herbs were spiritual herbs from the holy world, so the huge medicinal properties were transformed into pure energy that was beneficial to people. This helped him to be reborn, changed his meridians, and cleansed his marrows. This was a great benefit for the man. In just 2 days and 2 nights, this man had not only forcibly broken through to the early stage Tao-breaking realm, but even the toughness of his body had been greatly improved. In particular, his innate talent had also improved. Now, his 8 feet tall body was much better looking than before. Wu Qi pinched the man's philtrum hard, and the man who was knocked out by Wu Qi quietly woke up. After all, he was a powerful chaotic creature, so he quickly discovered the changes in his body. He leaped to his feet in ecstasy, then threw his head back and laughed wildly. "I'm not dead, I'm not dead, I'm not dead, my cultivation base, my body, my soul. I'm not dead, I'm not dead." After venting his anger, the man dropped to his knees, weeping bitterly as he bowed to Wu Qi and said, "Thank you, Senior, for your help. Thank you, Senior. Wu Tang is willing to die for Senior, Wu Tang is willing to go through fire and water for Senior, but in the future, let those bastards do all the dirty work." Wu Qi and Princess Xianglu exchanged a glance. Both could not help but find it funny. Wu Qi nodded and said, "Well, if there is such a danger in the future, I won't need you. Someone else will do it. It's just that you have to be loyal and devoted, or else." After all, Wutang Sheep was a chaos creature, at the early stage of Dao breaking. Back in Pan Gu world, he could be a powerful being. Therefore, Ji Hao would be happy to have him as a helper, so why not? After all, their lives were in the hands of Princess Xianglu, so Ji Hao wasn't worried that they would betray her. Xiaotang kept kowtowing to Wu Qi with tears of gratitude. After that, he came to stand behind Wu Qi with his head held high. His eyes shone brightly as he glanced around, sneering at those defectors who had thrown stones at him just now. The faces of the remaining 20 defectors paled in fear, and their legs trembled. Chaotic Creature had successfully passed this test, and Wu Qi said that he wouldn't use him again. Therefore, all the other risks would fall on them, wouldn't they? The deep voice echoed in everyone's ears, "Since you have passed this test, you are qualified to enter the Palace of Seven and read the Divine Evolution Scripture for 3 days and 3 nights. As for the others, if they dare to move, they will all be killed." Lights and shadows flashed around them. Next, Wu Qi and the others felt their bodies lightened, and were directly sent into a square-shaped, tower-like palace. By the time the lights and shadows stopped flashing, they had already arrived in an enormous palace. The walls of this palace were made of all kinds of beautiful jade, and the pillars were made of crystals. The floor was covered in a thick, orange-red carpet, which was made from a strange beast fur that no one had ever seen before. Every single strand of fur was wrapped in a faint purple flame, emitting a warm feeling. This carpet also carried a strange fragrance, which made one's ears and eyes sharper and refreshed. Bright light shone in from an unknown place, illuminating the entire palace. There were 108 enormous crystal pillars in the palace, and every one of them was transparent. Through the pillars, one could see that there were countless hidden compartments of different sizes, in which there were either a piece of paper, a piece of jade, or a scroll. Every single item was emitting an aura of treasure. Obviously, they were all extraordinary treasures. With a ding-dong sound, a large, transparent crystal hourglass appeared above everyone's head, and the shining sand in the hourglass flowed down rapidly. The voice said in a deep voice, "For 3 days and 3 nights, those who have just broken the seal can study the Divine Evolution Scripture. The others are not allowed to move around, or else they will be killed." A ray of light shot out from the crystal pillar closest to Wu Qi, and a book made of nephrite, which was extremely flexible and tough, fell into Wu Qi's hands. The handwriting on the book was condensed from purple golden metal liquid. The quaint handwriting was sparkling, and every word contained an extremely strong power. Once people saw it, they wouldn't be able to take their eyes off it until the handwriting was deeply imprinted in their divine soul. Fortunately, he had obtained the ancient legacy of the founding of the sacred realm in the outer 9 palaces, so he could read the language of the sacred realm. Otherwise, what was the point of studying the celestial evolution canon when he could not even read the characters in the books? There were 4 large words on the cover of the book. They were the words Celestial Evolution Canon. Below these 4 large words were 2 extremely small words. They were the words Volume 1. Wu Qi's heart sank. This was only the Volume 1 of the Divine Evolution Scripture. Could there be a Volume 2 or Volume 3? However, he didn't have much time. 3 days and 3 nights might not be enough to completely memorize the contents of this thin book. Wu Qi didn't have the time to ask the various questions of the voice, and hurriedly opened the book to read. As he read, Wu Qi became deeply immersed. The volume 1 of the Divine Evolution scripture was indeed mysterious. It actually started from the structure of the sacred realm, and explained the origin and development of the various runes in the sacred realm. From here, Wu Qi learned that the runes in the sacred realm were called Saint Seals. Each seal contained endless mysteries of the world, and possessed unimaginable power and divine abilities. Every leaf and every grain of sand had a saint seal as a reference, and every thunder and lightning also had their own saint seal marks. The volume 1 of the Divine Evolution scripture introduced the most common and basic knowledge of the saint seals in the sacred realm in detail. Earth, water, fire, wind, rain, dew, frost, snow, all sorts of saint seals corresponded to different powers. Only by thoroughly studying these saint seals could one learn the most basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Only then could one learn more profound knowledge. The saint seals were the foundation of the entire sacred realm, and the Divine Evolution scripture was the foundation for learning the voice. Wu Qi immersed himself in the vast knowledge of the saint seal like an intoxicated man. Relying on the formidable power of his divine soul, he forcibly imprinted the entire first volume of the Celestial Evolution canon into his divine soul before the time limit of 3 days and 3 nights was up. Is there a volume 2 and volume 3? Quickly hand them over. When the hourglass in the air collapsed, Wu Qi threw down the volume 1 of the Divine Evolution scripture and loudly berated. Chapter 1148. Wu Qi wanted the second part of the canon of celestial evolution. As soon as he said those words, the hourglass floating above his head disappeared. A fragrant aroma came from a corner of the hall. From a transparent crystal pillar, a beautiful lady walked out slowly. Her hair was tied up in a high bun, and she was wearing a palace dress that looked like clouds and mist. She was gorgeous, noble, and indescribable. This lady was beautiful, but she looked lifeless like a zombie. Step by step, she walked up to Wu Qi and asked coldly, "The canon of celestial evolution is divided into 3 volumes. Are you sure you want the middle, and lower volumes?" Cautiously looking at this lady, Wu Qi nodded and said, "I do need them." A cold gleam flashed across the lady's gray eyes as she said in a deep voice, "Please choose any one of your companions." Wu Qi was stunned. The lady's cold and emotionless voice gave him a bad feeling. He gave those defectors a glance, and saw that all of them were huddling up in fear, staring at him in a panic like frightened quails. Ji Hao didn't want to think too much. He grabbed a defector who didn't like him and threw him in front of him. "No! Senior, please spare my life." The defector let out a miserable howl and could no longer speak. The lady pressed her hand on his head. Countless streams of light, which were several times thinner than hair and formed from countless talismans, drilled into his body and penetrated into every part of his body. The man slowly floated up. His clothes turned into ashes and drifted down, while his body turned strangely transparent. Countless talismans were spinning rapidly inside his body. These talismans vaguely formed the shape of a 3-legged toad. Wu Qi remembered that this man was a 3-legged toad that lived in the chaos. He loved to devour metal, and his skin was copper and bones were iron. He was famous for his strong body. Countless talismans spun rapidly, and a strange rumbling noise could be heard. The man's body began wriggling like a melting candle. Within the time it took to finish a pot of tea, the man slowly shrunk into a 3 feet long, silver-haired, long-eared white rabbit. The woman coldly pointed at the white rabbit lying on the ground, unable to move, and said in a deep voice, "Restore it to its original state, and you can obtain the second volume of the Celestial Evolution Canon. If you can't do that, then you'll have to choose 6 people to follow you and kill them all." After a slight pause, another hourglass appeared above Wu Qi's head. The woman said in a deep voice, "You have 1 day." Wu Qi's expression became very serious. This woman's magic power was simply indescribable. In Panga world, Tao reasoning primordial unity golden immortals were capable of turning stones into gold and grass into cabbages. However, to turn a Tao reasoning expert into an ordinary white rabbit, one that did not show any signs of cultivation at all, was just an ordinary rabbit. It was too difficult to do so. Perhaps even those Tao-fusing saints could not do it, not to mention Tao reasoning primordial unity golden immortals. In order to restore the white rabbit to its original state in one day, not only would it need to restore its body, but it would also need to restore its divine soul, its magic power, and its original state before it transformed into a human. The complexity of the task was enough to make one collapse. Fortunately, he had just read the first volume of the Celestial Evolution Canon and obtained the complete primer. He knew that in the eyes of the almighty experts in the sacred realm, all living beings were composed of various energy runes. Although the three-legged toad's life form had been changed, all the spell symbols that made up its life form still remained in its body. It was just that someone had disrupted the structure of these spell symbols with a powerful divine ability, reorganizing and reconstructing them. As long as one could grasp the pattern of these runes and move them back to their original positions, there would be hope to restore it. Just now, when the man floated up into the air, Wuqi saw the structure of the three-legged toad's true form from his transparent body. As Wuqi's divine soul was extremely strong and his intelligence was extremely high, he could remember the structure of tens of thousands of runes very clearly. Reaching out his hand and pressing on the man's head, Wuqi imitated what the woman had done, sending thousands of torrents of runes that contained his divine sense into the man's body. The huge rabbit's body trembled. When Wuqi scanned it with his divine sense, his body turned transparent as well. Gradually, it no longer looked like a rabbit, but had completely transformed into a complex three-dimensional structure of runes. Wuqi recalled a sentence in the primer of the 9 palaces. As a qualified primer, spirit ancestor, or saint, one should not be deceived by any external appearance. All forms were nothingness, and only the structure of runes and energy was the essence of everything. His divine sense transformed into a sharp blade, tearing apart the nested runes in the rabbit's body one by one. Under the control of his divine sense, the runes carefully flew out in all directions, gradually returning to their original positions according to the structure of the three-legged toad in Wuqi's memory. Under the restraint of Wuqi's powerful divine sense, the runes were recombined into one, and amidst the bright light, the silhouette of a three-legged toad began blinking. The runes were torn apart, and the tyrannical magic power that had been imprisoned within the runes began to be released. This magic power was originally the three-legged toad's spirit's own magic power. When the woman in the palace dress turned him into a rabbit, all of his magic power was imprisoned within the runes within his body, which was why he had become a normal rabbit. Now, Wuqi had torn apart the nested runes, releasing the imprisoned energy. Gradually, according to Wuqi's will, the energy formed a complete network of energy circulation in his body. The eyes of the woman flickered with a dazzling cold light. She fixed her gaze on Wuqi's every move, not missing a single detail. This woman, who should be an artificial puppet, was like an examiner in an examination hall, testing whether Wuqi, a student, had enough knowledge and ability. The sand in the hourglass above Wuqi's head quickly flowed down. When there was only a little bit of sand left, a painful howl was heard, and the man just now was lying on the ground, covered in sweat. He trembled, holding his head and trembling on the ground. Cold sweat gushed out of his body like spring water, and soon, a large patch of the red carpet on the ground was wet. First, he was forcibly transformed into a white rabbit, and his divine soul were shattered and recombined. Then, Wuqi transformed him from a white rabbit back to his original body, and his soul was shredded and recombined once again. Neither the woman nor Wuqi deliberately protected him, so the man could clearly feel the pain of his divine soul being shattered and then pieced back together. At this time, he had already developed a deep fear of Wuqi and the woman. In his heart, Wuqi and the woman were the incarnations of all the demons in the world. He lay on the ground and cried bitterly. If Wuqi wanted him to die now, he would probably be so scared that he would immediately commit suicide. Changing the image of a living being from the level of the origin of life, even the soul was within the scope of change. This kind of divine ability was beyond everyone's imagination. Wu Qi did not feel anything when he acted according to the law, but the other onlookers had long been shocked, and even Princess Zhang was shocked and could not speak for a long time. To these almighty beings, this kind of divine ability was like a mortal seeing an immortal cast a spell that could turn stone into gold in front of him. It was equally shocking, and then equally terrifying. A dignified Tao reasoning expert had been needed as easily as plasticine by the woman and Wu Qi. This scene was too shocking. The woman nodded slowly. She casually pointed, and the first volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture in Wu Qi's hand slowly flew into the crystal pillar. After that, she waved her hand casually at the crystal pillar, and a book flew into Wu Qi's hand amidst a large sheet of bright light. You have the right to study the second volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture for 6 days and 6 pages. Another hourglass appeared above Wu Qi's head, and quicksand silently poured down. Wu Qi did not care about anything else. He sat cross-legged on the ground and quickly opened the second volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture. He was completely immersed in this thin book. If the first volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture taught the most basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, then the second volume had advanced to the level of many equations. In the second volume, it began to teach how to use runes to attack and defend, and how to use runes to destroy and create. In the second volume, everything in the world was a raw material. Mastering the power of runes was like having a carving knife in one's hand, and one could use these raw materials at will to carve the most satisfactory work. Every sentence in the second volume pointed to the essence of the entire endless void, and it thoroughly analyzed the various methods and experiences of transforming matter. As Wu Qi studied the second volume, all kinds of strange phenomena flashed around him from time to time. Sometimes a few forest sparrows flew, and sometimes a few white rabbits ran around. There were flowers, trees, insects, fish, birds, and beasts, and all kinds of strange creatures. Gradually, demon beasts began to appear around Wu Qi, and then all kinds of spirit beasts. When 1/10 of the sand in the hourglass was about to run out, immortal beasts began to appear around Wu Qi out of thin air. When the sand in the hourglass was about to run out, Wu Qi slowly closed the second volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture with a solemn face. A divine bird, Gale, slowly took shape over his head. It was obvious that the divine bird had reached adulthood. With a gentle flap of its huge wings that spanned 1,000 feet, a pressure of immortal energy belonging to a peak-level Tao reasoning expert came rushing over, scaring Ao Buzan and the others into taking a few steps back. On Pangu continent, the divine bird, Gale, was born with the cultivation base of peak-level Tao reasoning realm. Such an ability could scare a large group of people to death, and perhaps even several almighty experts of Tao fusing realm would be scared to death by it. After returning the second volume to the lady, who had been standing still with a solemn expression, Wu Qi asked with a smile, "If I may ask, what are the conditions if I want to read the second volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture?" The corner of the lady's mouth curved up slightly, indicating that she had laughed. She looked at Wu Qi, nodded slowly, and said, "If you want to read the second volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture, you have 9 days and 9 nights to dismantle me. Once you completely dismantle me, you will be able to read the second volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture. But, if you make a mistake, I will explode myself immediately, and all the living beings in this great hall will be killed." Cold sweat was dripping from Wu Qi's forehead. If it were just a few unlucky fellows who would be killed, he would not care at all. He would immediately propose to dismantle the lady. But, if he failed, everyone would be killed by the explosion. Then, the pressure was too great. He was not the only one here, there were also those who had defected, as well as a group of his family and friends. But, he had already obtained both the first and second volume of the Celestial Evolution scripture, and its mysteries were so fascinating that it would be unbearable if he could not read the second volume. How many more mysteries and magical techniques were recorded in the second volume? All of which made it difficult for Wu Qi to extricate himself. Should he continue the challenge, or leave? Cold sweat soaked Wu Qi's clothes. Chapter 1149. Just when he couldn't make up his mind, Princess Zhang Lu and Qixia came to his side and took his hands, one on the left and one on the right. Xia narrowed her eyes and said with a smile, "What's there to hesitate about? Xia absolutely believes in your power." Princess Xianglu did not say a word. She just held Wuqi's hands and smiled. Ao Buzan had already thumped his own chest loudly and shouted, "What's there to be afraid of? Let's do it. If we die, we'll face the sky, and if we don't die, we'll live forever. What's there to be afraid of? Let's risk it all. If we win, we'll have a good life together. If we see a beautiful girl, we'll fuck her. But if we lose, hee hee." Laughing in a weird way, Ao Buzan narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "If we lose, we'll have to face the threat of those monsters all the time. What's the point of living then?" Clicking his tongue, Ao Buzan seemed to be lost in his thoughts. Just now, he was full of heroic spirit, but now he laughed in a low voice and said, "I wonder if there are any beautiful girls among those world breakers. Hee hee, if there are, Lao Tzu will fuck one of them sooner or later." Standing aside, Lord Xiansheng and the others kept shaking their heads, not daring to say anything to Ao Buzan, this shameless and nasty guy. They walked up to Wuqi at the same time and showed Wuqi their greatest support. As Ao Buzan said, if Wuqi won, Wuqi would gain great benefits. But, according to Wuqi's character, he would teach all the things he learned to the others. In the end, all of them would benefit. As long as Wuqi won this time, all of them would be greatly improved. Although they might not be able to defeat the world breakers, at least they would be able to do whatever they wanted in Pangu world. Looking at the people around him, Wuqi nodded heavily. He smiled at the woman and said, "Then, let's begin. Oh, I'd like to ask, other than the Tianyuan canon, are there any other books here?" The lady stared at Wuqi coldly. She nodded slowly and said, "Apart from the sacred canon of heaven evolution, this palace is the one with the largest and most basic storage among the 36,000 palaces of the 7 sacred palaces. All of the foundational cultivation manuals created by the 7 most powerful beings, 800 sages, 100,000 spirit patriarchs, and over 100 million primordial beings were recorded here. After sorting out the books, there are a total of 58 million books here." Wuqi nodded and said, "How do I get them?" The woman's face gradually turned blurry. She slowly floated up and said in a cold voice, "If you get the 2nd volume of the Divine Canon of Heaven Evolution, you have the right to study the 55 million basic books of the Talisman Department, in here." Wuqi was enlightened. This woman was the final guardian of the basic books of the Talisman Department. If he could solve the problem she gave him, he would be able to get the 2nd volume of the Divine Canon of Heaven Evolution, and he would be able to study the 55 million basic books of the Talisman Department freely. At first glance, 55 million basic books sounded very scary, but when he thought about the fact that this library contained the basic books of all the powerful beings in the divine realm, which was 1,000,000,000,000 times larger than the Pangu world, he realized that it was not a big number at all. After all, in the current Pangu world, an ordinary primordial immortal might have taught his disciples over 10,000 different magic arts, and the disciples of a sect master could learn hundreds of thousands of different magic arts, not to mention those almighty beings in the holy realm. The woman in the palace dress had already turned into a human-shaped halo. Her palace dress had turned into 18 layers of hazy light mist that twined around the human-shaped halo. In the eyes of others, she was still a beautiful and cold woman, but in Wuqi's eyes, she had become a large-scale collection of runes. It was like solving a math problem. Wuqi had to use all kinds of methods he had learned from the 1st and 2nd volume of the Divine Canon of Heaven Evolution to dismantle this collection of runes. A new hourglass emerged above Wuqi's head, and the woman's voice came from nowhere, "If you dismantle me successfully, you will be blessed by the brightly lit heart for 1 month. Within 1 month, you will be able to master all 55 million basic books of the Talisman Department." Wuqi's spirit was suddenly shaken. The brightly lit heart. It would only take 1 month to master all 55 million basic books. There was nothing to hesitate about. Although the risk was great, the benefits he could gain were also great. What was there for him to hesitate about? His enormous divine sense poured out without any reservation, transforming into countless thin, gossamer tentacles that slowly swam around the woman's body. All the runes that made up the woman's body were recorded in the divine canon of heaven evolution, but all of them were interconnected in a three-dimensional structure similar to a trihelix, which was astonishingly complicated. Not to mention the woman's humanoid halo, just the 18 layers of hazy light mist surrounding her was so complicated that it could make one want to vomit blood. It took Wuqi 6 whole hours, but he still couldn't completely analyze the structure of the first layer of light mist. Cold sweat was dripping from Wuqi's forehead. Gnashing his teeth, he forced his divine sense into the light mist in the form of gossamer threads. While Wuqi was making his decision, the first trace of thief energy, which had gradually begun to merge with him, suddenly changed. It burst into a dazzling light and merged with Wuqi's divine sense in a twinkling of an eye. A wonderful feeling of enlightenment surged out from the depths of Wuqi's divine sense. Wuqi suddenly felt that he had truly and thoroughly understood this thief energy. It was extremely ancient, and it was definitely not just a pre-world power that was produced when Pan-gu created the world. Instead, it was something even more ancient, with an even more mysterious origin. After staying with Wuqi for so long, this time, when Wuqi was facing a great threat, this thief energy finally completely merged with Wuqi's divine sense. From now on, Wuqi's divine sense had become one with it, and there was no distinction between them anymore. The glowing mist, which was dense and difficult to analyze just a moment ago, was now full of loopholes. It was like a master thief who was proficient in picking locks had found the simplest marble lock. Chuckling, Wuqi transformed his divine sense into dozens of fine runes and passed through those loopholes. A series of popping noises could be heard, then the woman's clothes were shredded into pieces. The shredded clothes transformed into streams of light and gathered above the woman's head, condensing into a translucent and exquisite spell symbol. Ao Buzan sighed in surprise, "What a great trick. I always tear off women's clothes with my own hands, but how can he do it so easily?" The faces of Princess Zhanglu and Yi Xia changed at the same time. They threw a glance at Ao Buzan with darkened expressions, then fixed their eyes on the woman's beautiful body. No matter how one looked at it, this woman's body completely fit the aesthetic standards of any male creature. She was a human-shaped puppet created by a powerful being from the Holy Realm. But in Wuqi's eyes, this woman's body didn't exist at all. She was merely an amalgamation of energy and matter formed by countless spell symbols. His spirit power was like a sharp knife, freely moving through the complex nesting of spell symbols, and easily and skillfully unraveling the complex nesting of spell symbols. The woman's limbs gradually disintegrated, turning into a faint glow and merging with the spell symbols hovering above her head. Gradually, most of her body turned into light and dissipated. In the end, even her beautiful head and slender neck merged with the light. When the woman's body completely disappeared, a sigh of relief rang out in the air. The shining spell symbol silently imprinted itself on the center of Wuqi's eyebrows, turning into a stream of bone-chilling energy that fused with his soul. All of a sudden, Wuqi felt that the power of his divine soul had become extremely abundant, and his comprehension ability had improved by countless times. He suddenly felt that as long as he was willing to understand all the puzzles of time, he would be able to solve them in his mind. Countless books, jade pieces, and scrolls flew up from the huge crystal pillars in the surroundings. These books recorded the basic knowledge about the way of talismans from all the powerful beings in the Holy Realm, flying past Wuqi as streaks of light. Wuqi's eyes shone brightly. As long as a book passed by him, he would be able to quickly analyze and comprehend it, completely grasping it in the end. Several dozen books would pass by Wuqi with every snap of a finger. He had completely grasped the contents of all the books. As Wuqi grasped more and more about the way of talismans, the light around Wuqi became stronger and stronger. Suddenly, Wuqi laughed madly and reached out towards everyone. Ao Buzan let out a strange cry and was grabbed by Wuqi without being able to resist at all. The dragon scales in Ao Buzan's body sprayed out uncontrollably. 3 layers of thick, black scales covered Ao Buzan's entire body. Wuqi's fingers quickly moved around on Ao Buzan's body. A speck of light quickly waved on Ao Buzan's scales, and a terrifying heat flowed from Ao Buzan's scales into his internal organs. Ao Buzan screamed in pain. His black scales were burned red by the invisible heat, almost transparent, and each of them was bursting with a terrible heat and bursting with a blinding light. It was as if he had turned into a piece of iron embryo being calcined at a high temperature. Ao Buzan howled miserably and kept twisting and struggling, but Wu Qi just pointed his finger at him. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not break free from Wu Qi's grasp. At this moment, Wu Qi was like an adult longbow man, while Ao Buzan was just an ordinary mortal baby. The strength between them was completely disproportionate. His fingers quickly branded a large number of runes on each of Ao Buzan's scales. When Wu Qi touched them casually, Ao Buzan's scales, which were emitting a high temperature and strong light, quickly returned to normal. However, the shape of his black scales had changed, becoming thicker and thicker, and their edges sharper. At the same time, they had turned from black to black with a purple gleam, and within the purple gleam, there was a special gleam of gold. Wu Qi pointed his finger at Lord Xiansheng. Abruptly, the illusion-breaking halberd inside Lord Xiansheng's body flew out, piercing brutally into Ao Buzan's body amidst a strong beam of light. A bright flame flashed, but not even a scratch was left on Ao Buzan's scales. However, the tip of the illusion-breaking halberd, which had been upgraded dozens of times in the ruins of Blue Nightmare Palace, was broken, and it flew back into Lord Xiansheng's body while wailing. Surprised, Ao Buzan looked down at the spot where he was pierced just now. Suddenly, he clapped his hands and laughed wildly. With the dragon scales all over Lao Tzu's body now, he. Then, he changed the topic and came next to Wu Qi with a smug face. I still have a treasure with me. Can you draw me some runes like this? He asked in a low voice. Wu Qi rolled his eyes and kicked Ao Buzan away. After that, he waved his hand, and both Princess Zhang Lu and Yi Xia flew to his side at the same time. All kinds of talismans flew down at a high speed. Whether it was Wu Qi or the others, everyone's divine abilities and magic power were improving by leaps and bounds. Chapter 1150. While Wu Qi and his companions were cutting their way through the 7 sacred palaces, a storm was brewing on Panga continent. At the border between the East Sea and the southern region of Panga continent, at the center of a huge mountain range named the Great Dragon Mountains by Grandee Supremacy, an extraordinarily magnificent Zen forest was spreading out at a rate of several miles a day. The lush forest was filled with Bodhi trees that towered into the clouds. Clear streams gurgled under the trees, and lotuses of various colors grew under them. Many itinerant monks and bhikkhus sat under the trees in meditation. It was indeed a good place for Buddhism. At the center of the forest was a golden temple that stretched for hundreds of miles. The ground was paved with gold, the walls were made of yellow jade, the tiles were carved with yellow crystals, and the pillars forged with coiling dragons stood tall in all directions. The entire temple, measuring 100 miles in both width and length, was yellow in color, making it look like an old man with jaundice. Tall brass incense burners were erected everywhere in the monastery. From time to time, a young acolyte would pour a full basket of sandalwood incense into the incense burners. Billowing purple smoke would rise up and the rich fragrance would spread everywhere. Coupled with the chanting of sutras coming from all over the monastery forest, the solemn atmosphere would make people want to kneel down and worship devoutly. In the central area of the temple was a 1,000 miles tall, towering tree. The roots of the tree were around 20 miles thick, with green branches reaching out in all directions. The entire temple was covered by the shade of the tree. The tree radiated a faint Buddhist light, so although its shade blocked out the sun, the moon, and the stars, the temple was as bright as day at all times. Even a strand of its hair could be seen clearly on the ground. The tree's roots stretched tens of millions of miles from the ground, and they continued to extend outwards every day. Wherever the roots reached, lush Bodhi saplings would grow on the ground, and in a few days, they would become a towering Bodhi forest. Except for the Bodhi tree and the lotuses under it, all the other flowers and trees would wither and turn into soil. One of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs had chopped off his own finger and transformed it into the tree. The true form of this Buddhist patriarch was a Bodhi tree in the primordial chaos. Naturally, the tree transformed from his finger was endlessly magical. The huge tree protected the monastery. Powerful Buddhist light enveloped the surroundings, truly making it impervious to all evils. Let alone the various demons, even if 7 or 8 regular leaders of Taoism wanted to break through the restrictions on the huge piece of wood and infiltrate the monastery, it would still be impossible. There was a spacious and bright Buddhist hall under the tree, in the middle of which was an extremely spacious bed made of clouds. Standing on top of the bed, a Dei Supremacy, who was 5 feet tall and extremely burly, sat with his upper body bare. He was angrily tearing a golden-scaled, 5-colored, purple-eyed goldfish that had just been roasted in a large jade basin in front of him. The big gold fish was 6 feet long. Its body was covered in gold scales. Its eyes had a 5-colored light. Its pupils were purple. Clearly, it had some special god power. Although it had been cooked, the big goldfish's eyes were still shining. They were like giant gems. It was lying in the jade pot. Its body was steaming, and it released an intoxicating aroma. Standing to one side, the monk Ba Jia constantly gulped as he stared at the goldfish blankly. Tearing off a large piece of fragrant, plump, and tender goldfish meat, he shoved it into his mouth and chewed viciously. He patted the fish's head forcefully and called out to the monk Ba Jia, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and help your master out and send this vile spawn to the afterlife. Chant the Sutra of Samsara a few more times later and bless this vile spawn so that it can be reincarnated as livestock in its next life, so that it can be eaten by me again." The monk Ba Jia had been ravenous a long time ago. When he heard the Dei Supremacy's words, he rushed over in a hurry and tore off a large piece of fish meat, shoving it into his mouth. The fragrant fish meat basically melted in his mouth, without any residue at all. As the fragrant juices flowed into his stomach, the monk Ba Jia felt his entire body brimming with energy. Even his cultivation had skyrocketed. He could not help but sigh emotionally. Sure enough, goldfish were great nourishment. The Dei Supremacy only sneered again and again. Was this not great nourishment? The Buddhists had a bodhisattva called the merciful purple-eyed soul-suppressing great bodhisattva. Although she was a bodhisattva, she had the cultivation of a revered one. However, she was born a different race, and the other was a woman. That was why she had never been promoted to the position of Buddha. Her position in the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain was also very low. She was only responsible for guarding the mountain gate for the Buddha and cleaning the place every day. However, it was this bodhisattva, who had such an awkward position, who spoke to the revered one during the Buddhist conference a few days ago. She wanted the Dei Supremacy to take the lead and track down Thousand Heads and the other world breakers. After the apotheosis, the Buddhists and Taoists had completely taken over the great path of heaven in Panga world. The 7 Buddhas and 9 Tao secluded themselves in their caverns to cultivate, using the power of the great path they gained after becoming gods to make breakthroughs. The Taoists were in charge of the daily affairs, while the Buddhists were in charge of managing their disciples and handling the affairs of the Buddhists. The Dei Supremacy was a newcomer to the Buddhists. He had been given the title of the Great Spirit Vulture Mountain Leader. His position was above all the Buddhas. This touched on the interests of the Buddhas. The purple-eyed soul-suppressing bodhisattva said this. All the revered one and the bodhisattva at the conference voted to approve her suggestion. They insisted that the Dei Supremacy go find the world breakers and find out more about the enemy. A few years ago, during the apotheosis, Thousand Heads and the other world breakers tore down Tao Origin Palace. They killed all the Taoists and children in Tao Origin Palace. Ever since that day, Qianshou and the others had become more and more secretive. They had only acted 3 times in the past few years, but all 3 times, they had caused great losses to the Buddhist League and Tao League. At least thousands of Buddhist League and Tao League disciples had been killed. World breakers were scary creatures that could threaten a world. The Buddhists' powerful beings decided to let the Dei Supremacy go find the world breakers to test the waters. It was obvious what they were trying to do. It was because the Dei Supremacy was riding on their heads. The old Buddhist disciples were not happy, so they wanted the Dei's supremacy to die. Many revered one and the Bodhisattva threatened the Dei's supremacy. How could he agree to such a deadly mission? The 7 Buddhas had to deal with 1,000 heads and spit up blood. The Dei's supremacy was confident in himself, but he was only at the peak of Tao breaking. He was far away from the level of the Buddhas. Even if it was just to find out more information, it would be very risky. So, during the Buddhist conference, the Dei's supremacy and the Bodhisattva had a big fight. They completely turned against each other. He brought his disciples to break the gate of Great Spirit Vulture Mountain and return to the Great Dragon Mountain range. Before he left, he captured the big goldfish that was guarding the pond in front of the Buddha's gate. He picked a monk who was good at cooking meat and wine to cook it. The Buddhists said that the big goldfish was the child of the purple-eyed soul-suppressing Bodhisattva before she surrendered to the Buddhists. It was taken care of by the purple-eyed soul-suppressing Bodhisattva. It was her favorite. The Dei's supremacy was angry that the purple-eyed soul-suppressing Bodhisattva had provoked him, so he took the goldfish back. Eat it. Eat it clean. Gritting his teeth, he tore off half of the fish's tail and chewed it along with the bones. The Dei's supremacy squinted his eyes and laughed coldly. Burning the bridge after crossing the river. This is burning the bridge after crossing the river. The God-sealing war is over, and you fucking start to hurt me? Hey, do you think I am so easy to bully? Purple-eyed soul-suppressing Bodhisattva, fucking, do you feel pain now? Do you regret it? Fuck, who told you to cause trouble for me? The master and disciple duo devoured the big goldfish like a tornado. Especially after the Dei's supremacy consumed the fish's eyes, the power of his Buddhist eye technique had increased by a large margin. It was said that 80% of the purple-eyed soul-suppressing Bodhisattva's cultivation base was in her 2 eyeballs. It looked like this big goldfish was indeed of the same origin as her. These 2 eyeballs were truly 2 treasures. Just as the master and disciple were savoring the delicious taste of the big goldfish, they heard the shrill wail of a woman from afar, "My child. Baldi supremacy, return my child at once. If you dare to harm even a single scale of my child's armor, I will not rest until you are dead." Letting out a satisfied burp, the Dei's supremacy laughed coldly and said, "The culprit is here. Bajia, summon everyone back to their respective abodes and activate the Vajra myriad soul-suppressing formation. I will go out and deal with them." After a brief pause, the Dei's supremacy shoved a storage ring into Bajia's hand. He laughed coldly and said, "Inside are some powerful weapons created by Diyu. Even an ordinary Buddha would faint if struck by them. There are also a few extremely powerful poison talismans, powerful enough to kill even a world-venerable one. Do you understand now?" Bajia narrowed his eyes and smiled. He carefully put the ring on his finger and said respectfully, "Don't worry, master. Your disciple will be hiding on the temple's divine tree. As long as master is at a slight disadvantage, your disciple will give them a pleasant surprise." Nodding his head in satisfaction, the Dei's supremacy patted Bajia's shoulder, picked up his Vajra scepter, casually wrapped the 7 treasures Kasaya around his waist, and bolted out of the temple hall. "What's going on?" he murmured to himself. "Half a month ago, I was still in contact with my true self, but now, I've completely lost contact with him. He has entered the 7 Holies' palace. I have to hurry back and save him. With this, I've pissed off most of the Buddhist school." Gritting his teeth, the Dei's supremacy cursed softly, "Those 7 old bald bastards. Fucking burn the bridge after crossing it. They'll all die a horrible death." With a cold snort, a white cloud sprayed out from beneath the Dei's supremacy's feet. He stood on the cloud and flew above the Chan monastery of Great Naga, wobbling. He cursed loudly through the protective restrictions, "Purple-eyed, you old bald donkey, who's your child? Aren't you a nun? Why do you have a child? Huh? Don't tell me you broke the rules and accidentally got pregnant with a certain, with a certain virtuous monk of Buddhist school?" Right above the Chan monastery of Great Naga, purple-eyed spirit suppression bodhisattva hovered in the air with the 18 bodhisattvas under her. Behind them were countless arhats, Kitagarbha, heavenly kings, strongmen, Vajras, and so on. The Dei Supremacy glanced over. Oh my, the 8 Vajras guarding the front gate of the Great Spirit Vulture were actually all here. The 8 Vajras were the signature figures of Buddhism. Although they were titled as Vajras, any single one of them was no weaker than regular Buddhas. If they worked together to cast down the 8-directional Vajra demon suppression formation together with the Buddhist treasures the Buddha had bestowed upon them, even regular Buddhist venerables would be suppressed by them. As for the Arhats, they were the renowned 500 golden Arhats of Buddhism. They were also the signature figures of Buddhism. In the past, the 500 golden Arhats were equivalent to the angels of Buddhism. If the Buddha had any decrees, it would be these golden Arhats who would run around and spread them. The Buddhist army above the Chan monastery of Great Naga exceeded 1 million at the very least, and every single one of them was an elite of Buddhism. The formation was truly terrifying. Standing on the golden lotus platform, purple-eyed spirit suppression Bodhisattva heard the Dei Supremacy's scolding, and her purple eyes shone with fury. She let out a sharp whistle without a care, and with a flip of her hand, several hundred bolts of silvery thunder whistled down. Chapter 1151. In the translucent palace of the Celestial Court, Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen, the former cult master of Tao League, Tai Yun, who had been officially conferred the title of the Celestial Court, was sitting on a throne. Standing solemnly in the translucent palace were the 8 righteous gods, 12 celestial lords, and countless god kings, immortal kings, divine officials, and immortal officials, all 36,000 of them. They were presenting their reports according to their ranks and positions. The 8 righteous gods were conferred by the almighty experts of Tao League who had fallen in the investiture of God's war. The 12 celestial lords were all core disciples of Tao League, and most of the god kings and immortal kings were direct disciples of Tao League. Only the middle and lower grade immortal officials who ran around were made up of the disciples of immortal sects in outer heavenly realms who were not loved by their grandmothers or grandfathers. But, all of them were disciples of Tao League when they were alive. So, in the face of Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Zhen, who had been transformed from Great Celestial Sect Master Tai Yun, everyone was respectful, fearful, and loyal, and would not heed any orders from others. Sitting on a throne that had been temporarily set up next to Yuan Zhen, Violet Spirit Great Celestial Emperor, also known as Reverend Shouzhua, sat there like a clay sculpture. No one gave him a second glance, as if he did not exist at all. After the gods of the Celestial Court reported their recent duties, 2 gods in purple robes and golden armor strode in with jade pendants in their hands. Both of them were the righteous gods of mountains in the investiture of God's War of the 3 Realms. One was the Zhu Mountain Emperor outside Liangzhu, and the other was the secluded Mountain Emperor of the westernmost land of Yuxiong Plain. Each of them was in charge of 8 million mountain gods of various sizes, with hundreds of millions of mountain gods and ghost soldiers under their command. Seeing the 2 mountain gods enter, Reverend Shouzhua, who was sitting on the throne, laughed. According to the agreement between the Buddha and the Daozu, he had the authority to supervise the gods of mountains and rivers in the lower realms. When he sat in the Hall of Enlightenment, these immortal officials of the Celestial Court could not give him any face, but these mountain gods and water gods should at least give him some respect, right? However, the 2 mountain god emperors only bowed to Great Celestial Emperor Yuan Yan according to the rules, and they didn't even look at Lord Zhua. The 2 great emperors personally went to the Sky Court to report to Yuanzhen Great Celestial King about the fact that the mountain gods had been searching for the world breakers for the past few years. They had discovered that some of the mountain spirits and water monsters were somehow connected to the world breakers, and they had sent out an army of netherworld soldiers to destroy them. Because this was a serious matter, the world breaker was a person that Daozu had personally ordered the gods of the 3 realms to search and capture. Therefore, when the 2 great emperors found signs of the world breakers' activities in their territories, they personally came to the Celestial Court to report the matter to Yuanzhen Great Celestial King. Yuanzhen Great Celestial King smiled and nodded. He asked the 2 great emperors to sit down. Although he was the master of the Celestial Court, the 2 mountain god emperors were also the top mountain gods in the world. They were only half a level lower than him in terms of godhood. Although they were under the jurisdiction of the Celestial Court, the two great emperors were Yuanjun Great Celestial King's brothers before they died. Why would Yuanjun Great Celestial King give them a hard time? They were old friends, so they had to be treated the way they should be. Shou Zhuo coughed. He smiled and asked the two great emperors, "May I ask how you two great emperors found out that the mountain spirits and water monsters were connected to the world breaker?" It was quiet in the Hall of Enlightenment. While superior being Shou Zhuo's words echoed in the hall, the two great emperors were sitting on the thrones that had been temporarily moved here, as if they hadn't heard superior being Shou Zhuo's question. Esteemed Shou Zhuo blushed and asked again. However, the two great emperors still did not give him any face. They just narrowed their eyes slightly and fixed their gazes on a certain floor tile in front of them as if they wanted to burn through the floor tile with their gazes. Shou Zhuo flew into a rage. He stood up, flung his sleeves, and shouted, "Did you two great emperors not hear what I said?" Zhu Shan Great Emperor coughed. He raised his head and smiled at Yuanjun Great Celestial King. "Celestial King, please send some elite soldiers to Zhu Shan's camp to prevent the world breaker from suddenly launching some conspiracy. The strength of the ghost soldiers and ghost generals of the land is far inferior to the heavenly soldiers and heavenly generals of the Celestial Court. They can only be used to suppress the mountain spirits and water monsters. They can't deal with those powerful beings. If there are any mistakes, it will not be good." Yuanjun Great Celestial King did not seem to see Shou Zhuo's angry expression. He nodded with a smile and said, "This matter is urgent. Please lead the 8th Division Devil Rinsing True Origin Great Emperor and follow the two great emperors to the land of enlightenment." Shou Zhuo's face turned cold. He flung his sleeves, transformed into a beam of spiritual light, and flew out of the Hall of Enlightenment. When the immortal officials and gods in the hall saw that Shou Zhuo had left, the atmosphere in the hall became much more relaxed. The 8 righteous gods and the 12 heavenly lords laughed at the same time. Their laughter made the 36,000 immortal officials and gods in the hall laugh at the same time. Not long after, Yuanjun Great Celestial King and the two mountain god great emperors also grinned and laughed. Everyone laughed happily. Great Celestial Emperor Yuanjun shook his head and sighed as he laughed and said, "I don't know where this old Taoist wildfox Zen came from. The Taoist patriarch has given him an empty title, so he should just eat, drink, and be merry. Yet, he still wants to meddle in the affairs of other places for no reason." The two mountain god great emperors burst out laughing. While laughing, the secluded mountain emperor clapped his hands and said, "Let him be. When he gets too many soft rebukes, he will naturally stop. It has only been a few years since the conferment of gods, and his position as the 7th Celestial Emperor is still hot. He can't help but have some unrealistic sweet dreams." After laughing for a while, Yuanjun said coolly, "Speaking of which, his divine abilities are not to be underestimated. If he is willing to obey orders, there is no harm in giving him some benefits. But, how can it be so easy for him to set up his own branch in the Celestial Court? The Celestial Court is full of disciples of my Tao League. How can he have a say in it?" Lord Shou Zhuo rushed out of the translucent palace angrily, transforming into a beam of cold light and descending toward the first heaven. The anger on his face had long since disappeared, replaced by a cold smile. When he arrived at the first heaven of Huangzhengtian, Lord Shou Zhuo pondered for a moment, then suddenly flashed outside the southern heavenly gate, opening his eyes and looking down at the lower realm. Wherever his gaze passed, he saw that the dense immortal clouds above the Celestial Court were pushed away by two beams of light, revealing a large, transparent pit with a circumference of several dozen feet. Amidst the light, he could see a magnificent Zen forest, but the sky above the Zen forest was densely packed with an army of over 1,000,000 Buddhists. A bodhisattva, who was waving his hands and spitting saliva, was leading 18 bodhisattvas who were sitting on lotus thrones, arguing with a bare-armed monk who was separated by a layer of Buddhist light. The southern heavenly gate was guarded by the 8 heavenly kings, who had just been conferred by the Celestial Court. Seeing Lord Shou Zhuo, they hurriedly turned their backs and pretended not to see him. Not only the 8 heavenly kings, even the immortal soldiers behind them had rolled their eyes and cast their gazes at the boundless void, but none of them took a glance at Lord Shojua, nor did any of them take the initiative to greet him. Not only did great celestial Emperor Yuanzhen reject Lord Shojua, but none of the other 5 great celestial emperors of the celestial court, or the gods and lords of heaven under their direct command truly treated Lord Shojua as a divine emperor. Although Lord Shojua was conferred by Daozu as the real 7th celestial emperor of the celestial court, Daozu had closed the Daluotian gate and was cultivating in seclusion with the power of the heavenly Tao of Pangu world and the endless fortune of the human race. How could he have the mood to help Lord Shojua? Therefore, over the past few years, Lord Shojua had become a hated existence in the celestial court. Even the servants who cleaned the stables of the celestial court did not pay much attention to him. If Lord Shojua had not been operating on Pangu continent for a long time and brought a large number of Tao League disciples to heaven, perhaps he would not even have a single subordinate to order around. With a cold snort, Lord Shojua pointed at the scene shown in the ball of light and cried out, "There is a murderous aura rising into the sky in the mortal realm. Clearly, a war has broken out. As guards of the southern heaven gate, are you neglecting your duty by not reporting this to the celestial emperors?" The 8 heavenly kings still did not bother to look at Lord Shojua. They were backed by great celestial emperor Yuanzhen, the newly conferred great celestial emperor of the celestial court, and all of them were Yuanzhen's personal disciples when they were alive. So, why would they take Lord Shojua's words seriously? Only the 2 minor immortal officials, who were given the titles of clairvoyant and clairaudient, who were guarding the southern heaven gate, were a little fearful when they heard Lord Shojua's words. The clairvoyant widened his eyes and giggled, "That is an internal strife of the Buddhist League, and it has nothing to do with the celestial court. Great celestial emperor Ziji Ling, even if you report this to the other great celestial emperors, no one will pay attention to it." Clairaudient giggled and said, "Besides, they are fighting on Pangu continent, and it is not under the jurisdiction of the celestial court. On the other hand, you, the great celestial emperor, have the power to supervise all the affairs in the earth realm. If you really want to interfere, you should intervene in this matter, shouldn't you?" The 8 heavenly kings sneered in unison. Shaking their heads, they walked into a pavilion on the east side of the southern heaven gate, which was specially built for them to rest on weekdays. Before long, a melodious immortal tune could be heard, and a few beautiful fairies were singing and dancing, accompanied by a large amount of fine wine and immortal fruits. The 8 heavenly kings were having fun in front of Lord Shojua. Qianlian and Jinfeng Er looked at each other, then they too left Shojua Shangren behind and happily slipped away to the balcony. Although their official positions in the celestial court were low, the tasks they were responsible for were extremely important. There were few people in the entire celestial court who could see and hear better than them, so they were very respected in the southern heaven gate. When the heavenly kings were having fun, they could also get some fine wine and delicacies, and perhaps even hook up with a few fairies and have a good time. It was much better than staying with Lord Shojua, who was all alone. Lord Shojua sneered and scolded in a low voice, "A bunch of rascals. Hee hee, let's see how long you can have fun." After sneering a few times, exalted Shojua suddenly shouted sternly, "How dare you raise your troops and start a war in broad daylight? Since you don't care about this matter, let me handle it. After all, I am one of the celestial emperors conferred by Daozu. You can enjoy your position without doing anything, but I can't." His clear voice spread across the 33 heavens, and even went straight to the Daluotian. As Lord Shojua's voice rang out, a large cloud flew out of his celestial emperor's mansion in Huangzhentian's territory. About 1,000,000 immortals, clad in immortal robes and armors, flew toward the southern heaven gate in a neat formation. After gathering these immortals who had submitted to him, Lord Shojua flew straight toward Pangu continent through the cloud path. Disdainful sneers came from the palaces of the 6 celestial emperors and countless immortal officials in the various heavenly realms of the celestial court at the same time. Chapter 1152. Purple-eyed soul suppression Bodhisattva and Venerable De were still at each other's throats. The 2 of them had already been hurling insults at one another for a whole 2 hours. Venerable De was purely being unreasonable. He refused to tell them where the purple-eyed soul suppression bodhisattva's child was. All he did was furiously criticize the purple-eyed soul suppression bodhisattva for leading an army of Buddhism to attack his Chan monastery of Great Naga. This was disrespectful to the Buddhas. Purple-eyed soul suppression bodhisattva was also overcome with anger. She sobbed and cursed Venerable De, insisting that Venerable De had killed her child. She had already lost her mind from anger, to the point where she even forgot to give the order to attack the Chan monastery of Great Naga. The million Buddhist soldiers behind purple-eyed soul suppression bodhisattva were all elites of Spirit Vulture Mountain. Even the 7 Buddhas were reluctant to send them into the investiture of gods during the War of Conferred Gods. If they attacked the Chan monastery of Great Naga regardless of the price, then even Venerable De would have to flee like a rat even if he was made of steel. As for the other Buddhist cultivators of the monastery, how could they possibly survive under the attack of the elites of the core forces of Buddhism? However, purple-eyed soul suppression bodhisattva had forgotten about this. She sobbed and cursed at Venerable De. She had not given the order to attack, so why would the 18 bodhisattvas under her be bold enough to speak up? 18 female bodhisattvas of otherworldly origins sat on the lotus pedestals like statues, staring at the furious purple-eyed soul suppression bodhisattva in silence. After arguing and yelling for another 2 hours, a fragrant breeze drifted over from the sky, and graceful, immortal music drifted down. 72 Taoist children in purple heavenly robes descended from the sky with incense burners, lanterns, flower baskets, horsetail whisks, and other ceremonial implements in their hands, scattering half-transparent, dazzling flowers along the way. These Taoist children lined up in 2 rows above the Chan monastery of Great Naga like Chi-Chi. They called out together, "The immortals of the lower world shall provide the violet extreme inspiration, great heavenly emperor of the 9 heavens." Several dozen long cries of cranes rang out, and several dozen peak golden immortals in golden Taoist robes drifted down from the sky on red-crowned cranes with wingspans of over 30 meters. The red-crowned cranes flapped their wings gracefully, circling above the Chan monastery of Great Naga with these immortals on their backs. With the arrival of these immortals, there was a faint fragrance in the air. Then came the deep sound of drums. 600,000 immortals with varying cultivation bases, clad in immortal robes and armors, mounted on all kinds of mounts, divided into neat phalanxes of 1,000 people, stepped on clouds and descended from the sky. These immortals looked at the gloomy-looking purple-eyed soul-suppressing bodhisattva and the million Buddhist soldiers behind her with arrogant and provocative gazes, and from time to time, some of them secretly chuckled. These immortals were the leaders and elders of many small and medium-sized immortal sects in outer heavenly realms who had submitted to Reverend Shojua. In their own sects, they were the seniors who stood high above the masses, and now, they were the trusted subordinates of the great celestial emperor of violet extreme insight. Their knowledge and vision were shallow, and they had never seen anything big. They didn't know that Sage Shojua was being ostracized in the celestial court. He was just proud of himself because he had found a powerful backer. Even if there were 19 Buddhas in front of them, these immortals, whose cultivation bases were no higher than gold immortals, would not take them seriously, let alone 19 bodhisattvas. After all, Sage Shojua's reputation was well known, and he had the cultivation base of a peak-level Tao-breaking expert. Behind these 600,000 immortals was a chariot pulled by 108 red-crowned cranes. The shape of this carriage was smooth like a flowing cloud, and it was completely constructed from translucent green jade. Countless immortal beasts, birds, mountains, and rivers were inscribed on it, causing it to reveal an extraordinary and elegant aura amidst its dignified and solemn aura. More than 10,000 gold immortals in golden armor surrounded the chariot, led by a dozen old purple-robed immortals with the cultivation base of Tao reasoning realm. They were also the most elite group of people around Sage Shojua. When Pangu continent was in chaos, Sage Shojua had taken in countless immortal sects, big and small, as if he was collecting trash. But, there were not many gold immortals among them, and most of them were below the realm of heaven immortals or nascent divinity. The only ones he could use to keep up appearances were the primordial immortals of Underhand sect. From Patriarch Jiang Yun to Patriarch Qing Shen, as well as Luo Lu, who was taken in by Wu Qi, there was really no one they could use. The real strength of Underhand's sect was not limited to this. However, it was not good to use all the forces they had in the dark, so only a few of them could be seen. The reason why Sage Shojua was ostracized by the 6 great celestial emperors was not only because of the power struggle, but also because he did not have enough powerful disciples. If he had 300 to 500 primordial immortals who were at the realm of Tao reasoning, the 6 great celestial emperors would not have ostracized him, but would have tried their best to win him over. Behind the chariot were the remaining 400,000 immortals. The overall strength of this group of immortals was even weaker, with many of them only having the cultivation base of 30th tier heaven immortal. They might be the ancestral masters of some sects in those remote and desolate outer heavenly realms, but in the celestial court, they were nothing. Just like Supremacy 3 Flame, who had ascended to the celestial court many years ago, his cultivation base as a heaven immortal could only serve as a janitor in the celestial court. Purple-eyed Bodhisattva panted as she looked at Sage Shojua and his company descending from the sky. A disdainful sneer hung on the corner of her mouth. If they were the regular army of the celestial court, and those were the elites of the Tao League who had died in the war of investiture of the gods, she would be more cautious. But now, it was the famous nominal great celestial emperor of the heaven, esteemed Shojua, and the bunch of shrimp soldiers and crab generals under him, so the purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva really didn't take him seriously. Among the 1 million immortals, there were less than 100,000 gold immortals and only about 10 primordial immortals. Moreover, they all looked so poor that they did not carry the aura of powerful magical treasures. Let alone the fact that purple-eyed Bodhisattva was here herself, even any one of the 1 million Buddhist soldiers behind her could slaughter all these immortals. With a sneer, purple-eyed Bodhisattva forcefully suppressed the anger in her heart. She did not even spare a glance at the army guarding Sage Shojua. Instead, she pointed at Sage Shojua and shouted, "Damn Baldi, give me back my child, or today will be the end of the Chan Monastery of Great Naga. I'll definitely cut off your dog head with my own hands." Purple-eyed Bodhisattva roared as if she wanted to kill, but Sage Shojua flew out of the protective formation with a straight face and bowed respectfully at Sage Shojua's chariot. "I am Sage Shojua. Greetings, Your Majesty, the Violet Spirit Great Celestial Emperor, conferred by Daozu. I wish you a long life, Great Celestial Emperor, and endless immortal blessings." The hearts of the Buddhists immediately skipped a beat. Sage Shojua was indeed the Great Celestial Emperor conferred by Daozu. Although he was just a figurehead, it did not seem like they could ignore him. After all, he represented Daozu. If they did not bow to him, it would seem rather inappropriate. Reverend Shojua had changed into a regal robe of a celestial emperor. He slowly walked out of the chariot, surrounded by a few beautiful female immortals. Each of them carried a small incense burner in their hands. Faint purple smoke rose from the burners, filling the air with a warm, intoxicating aroma. He helped Sage Shojua up with a smile and said, "Brother, there's no need to be so polite. Our friendship was forged through battle." Sticking out his chest and looking around, Sage Shojua suddenly cried out in surprise, "Oh my, brother, your Chan Monastery of Great Naga is a peaceful place of Buddhism, so why is there someone so arrogant and despotic, actually blocking your entrance and roaring at you?" Rubbing his eyes, Sage Shojua cried out at the dark-faced purple-eyed spirit suppression Bodhisattva, "Oh my, this Bodhisattva is also a great virtue of Buddhism, so why is she attacking a disciple of Buddhism?" According to what I know, Brother Sage Shojua is the mountain master of Spirit Vulture Mountain, conferred by the Buddha himself. You rank above all the revered ones, so why is a disciple of Buddhism attacking their own mountain master? Sage Shojua let out a long sigh. He stuck the Vajra pestle into his belt and brought his palms together with a bitter smile. Buddha is merciful. This is the misfortune of our Sanskrit school. Sigh, to think that there are still ambitious people in a peaceful place of Buddhism. I might have obtained the empty title of the Mountain Master of Spirit Vulture Mountain, but I've never interfered with the affairs of the various mountains. Yet, those people keep pestering me. I've already fled back to my own Bodhimanda from Spirit Vulture Mountain, but they're still unwilling to let me go. Sage Shojua cried out, "What? Are they trying to murder the Mountain Master of Spirit Vulture Mountain conferred by Daozu?" Purple-eyed spirit-suppressing Bodhisattva was so angry that her eyes darkened. "Listen up, great celestial emperor!" she cried out. Sage Shojua interrupted her rudely. "There's nothing to listen to. As disciples of Buddhism, how dare you disobey the Buddha's decree and attack the mountain master of Spirit Vulture Mountain conferred by the Buddha himself? That's an unforgivable crime. You're in the 3 realms, and yet you're so rude to me, the great celestial emperor conferred by Daozu. You didn't even greet me. Have you ever respected Daozu?" Pointing at the many Buddhists whose expressions had changed, Sage Shojua sneered and said, "It's fine if you don't respect Daozu, but the 7 Buddhists are your ancestors after all. Yet, you don't even listen to the Buddha's decree. You don't respect the Buddha, and you don't respect the Tao. Who do you respect?" Sage Shojua turned around slowly and said in a sinister voice, "Don't tell me you respect the Realm Breaker, those demons from the outer realms?" Although purple-eyed Bodhisattva had lost her mind with anger, she was still shaken by Sage Shojua's accusation and almost fainted. But, before she could defend herself, Sage Shojua had snapped, "Where are the mountain gods and earthly gods? Quickly send out troops to capture this group of evil creatures who colluded with the Devil Lord and conspired against the law. If you don't obey my order and let this vile creature go, hee. Buddha and Daozu will come to investigate." Now that the deification process on Panga continent had been decided, there were mountain gods and earthly gods in every mountain, and there was a mountain god in every 10 miles. Just inside and outside the Great Dragon Mountain Range, there were hundreds of thousands of mountain gods and earthly gods. Each of them had at least hundreds of nether soldiers under their command, which was a huge number. Countless earthly mountain deities, together with countless Yin soldiers, soared into the sky from all directions, bringing with them the black wind and the Yin Qi as they charged toward Qin Wentian. Most of these mountain gods and earthly gods were disciples of various small and medium-sized immortal sects in outer heavenly realms when they were alive, and the strongest among them was only at the realm of nascent divinity. How could they dare to disobey Sage Shojua's order? Among them were the slain clansmen of the Fiend Realm, Ghost Realm, Spirit Realm, and Demon Realm. They were all strangely shaped, and they all rushed over on dark winds. The number of low-level cultivators and living beings of the 4 realms who had died in the War of Conferred Gods numbered in the trillions. After they were conferred the title of gods, their cultivation bases were strengthened by the power of the heavenly Tao, and their cultivation bases had improved by several tiers. Now,